On June 16, 2016, Ayesha Curry tweeted, "I've lost all respect, sorry. This is absolutely rigged for money. Or ratings, I'm not sure which. I won't be silent. Just saw it live, sorry." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Sports Tweet Saturday, and I felt it was time to dip our toes into the water of a fairly common type of bad sports tweet. The tweet from the athlete family member. Ayesha Curry is, of course, the wife of NBA superstar Stephen Curry, and so this tweet is not just from some rando. And for my fellow sickos who are also obsessed with athletes' family member tweets, don't worry, I'll do a Marcus Vick week in like the 700s. As for this tweet specifically, Ayesha Curry was commenting on what she saw at the end of Game 6 of the 2016 NBA Finals. The 2016 NBA Finals was a matchup between the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Golden State Warriors. It was a rematch from the year before, and this year the Warriors came into the playoffs 73-9, the greatest regular season record of any NBA team ever. They were a juggernaut. This was going to be a historic season, but in Game 6, they were up 3-2 in the series, and they lost after Stephen Curry, for the first time in his playoff career, fouled out and was ejected. The specific moment I believe that Ayesha says she thinks is rigged is Steph's 6th foul, which is the final foul you can have before you get kicked out of the game. Now let's take a look at it to see if we think it's rigged. I personally could go either way, but I also think that complaining about getting a foul called when you're trying to, like, press LeBron James in the backcourt at the end of a game is silly. Like, why are you doing that to begin with? You're the best player on the team, and you have 5 fouls. Just play defense normally. Right after he fouled out, he actually took his mouthpiece out of his mouth and threw it and ended up hitting a fan, which you can kind of see here. That ended up getting him literally ejected from the game, meaning he couldn't even stay on the sidelines to watch the end of it. And so obviously Ayesha is heated about this. She's heated that her husband's team lost. She's heated that it kind of came down to a foul call going against him. And so she reacted poorly. She tweeted that she thought it was rigged. Thinking that a sports game that goes against the way you want it to go is rigged is a tale as old as time. It's existed for long before Twitter, especially because back in the day, sports games were rigged way more often. And yes, she should not have tweeted this. She is the wife of an NBA player. She herself is pretty famous. She, is a celebrity chef, and their whole family's famous, so she should not have tweeted this. I'm not going to pretend like this wasn't a bad thing to tweet. But also, I feel like wives of famous athletes get a bit too hard of a time, and I don't know, we've all tweeted something like this. I've definitely tweeted that I thought there was some shady stuff afoot when the team I wanted to win loses. And obviously my account is not as high stakes as Ayesha Curry's, but we're only human after all. And I feel like why this tweet has lived on, because like I said, a crazy tweet from a family member being mad about a game is not that unusual, is the wording of it. The fact that it starts off with, "I've lost all respect, sorry," is so funny, because it's like she really had a lot of faith in the NBA as an institution. She's like, oh my god, what I saw up close, I can't respect this anymore. And then rigged for money, ... or ratings, also great. Just there's so much stupid stuff in this. And it's just a perfect way of expressing the kind of childish anger you have whenever your team loses, where you try to blame anyone but the team itself. For her part, later on, Ayesha Curry apologized for the tweet. She says, tweeted in the heat of the moment because the call was uncalled for, and then added that apparently earlier that night, her father was racially profiled by the police who tried to take away his badge, and so she was in a bad mood. I obviously don't know if that's true or not, but if it is true, that would put me in a bad mood too, and also, I forgive her anyway. Tweeting a dumb thing in the middle of a sports moment is completely understandable. People gave her way too hard of a time for this, in my opinion. And this tweet gets referenced all the time. A lot of times people just repost it verbatim during a sporting event that they don't like the outcome of. It's always done a little tongue-in-cheek. People don't post it if they actually think something was rigged. They post it when they're kind of mad about what's going on. For example, Barstool Big Cat tweeted it during a Packers-Lions game in 2023. Earlier this year, Reggie Chapman reposted a photo of it while saying, watching Canes football. Stephen LeBron posted it saying, me watching India lose in the semifinals of Olympic breaking. Tyrese Banksy posted it last year during the series between the Knicks and the 76ers. She thought that this play where Tyrese Maxey lost the ball to Josh Hart, which caused the Knicks to win the game, was rigged, and absolutely not, baby. Go Knicks, go Knicks, go Knicks! It's also used by people outside of sports, where this guy 99 Vinyl said that it was absolutely rigged for money when Travis Scott's album debuted at number 2 instead of number 1, which was Sabrina Carpenter's album. But my favorite example I found was this guy on the Food Network Reddit who posted the screenshot with the caption, me watching this season of Spring Baking Championship. You know a tweet has an impact when it's being used on the r/Food Network subreddit. The thing about sports is, it can turn the most rational person into an absolute psycho, and so that's why I think we should all have a little grace for angry sports tweets. Obviously, if someone tweets something threatening, or says something about an athlete's family member that's way out of bounds, that is completely not okay, I think that reflects more on them than it does the insanity of sports. But when someone says something irrational, like that this game is rigged for money or ratings, We all know what they're doing. They're just getting their feelings out. And it's not the best way to get their feelings out, but come on, cut them a little slack. The funny end to the story is that, of course, the Cavs won the next game as well, and the Warriors lost the entire NBA Finals, so I'm sure she thought that game was rigged for money or ratings as well, but just didn't say it. Follow for a new tweet every day, and consider subscribing so you can get the Museum of Not Twitter, a weekly show where I cover a thing that was big on the internet but not on Twitter necessarily, and also you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On December 14, 2019, Lil Jon Lovitz tweeted, "Me, peeling a banana. May I take your jacket, lol? Coworker also in the break room. Do you think other people can't hear you?" This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Subscriber Sunday, where my subscribers get to suggest and then vote on which tweet I cover. And I'll be honest with you, this tweet is smaller than a lot of the tweets I've covered, but I think it speaks to something that I find very important and is very important to being a happy human being. That is, doing bits that are just for you. First and foremost, this tweet could be a hypothetical joke. This could be a made-up scenario that Lil Jon Lovitz is coming up with. But as far as I'm going to evaluate it, I'm going to assume it actually happened, just because I have a lot less to say about it if it's a made-up joke. So if we're to assume this is real, we can imagine that Lil Jon Lovitz, whoever he actually is in real life, was caught doing a bit just for himself, and someone kinda made fun of him for it. Well, they actually didn't make fun of him for it. That I think would be better. They judged him for it. And I get it. It would be weird if you heard a coworker just talking to a banana. I understand why you'd be weirded out by that. But I also think people being slightly judgmental towards you is no reason not to do those tiny, silly bits that are only for you. To me, they're one of the best ways to get through the monotony of the day. Personally, a thing I do often is if I'm walking down a hallway that I think I'm alone in, I'll do some sort of silly walk. Maybe I'll drag my leg behind me like I was shot in a movie, or I'll skip in a weird way. And sometimes I've gotten caught and it's awkward, but other times I'm just having the experience of walking down a hallway and am 10% happier. You can end the sentence, "There are two kinds of people," a lot of different ways, but one way I think is actually relevant to me often is that there are two kinds of people. People who are raised in households where people do bits all the time, and people who weren't. And I don't want to say I have trouble relating to people who are raised in households where bits weren't flying all the time, but I kind of do. My dad is a bit machine. I'm one of 3 boys. Me and my 2 brothers were doing bits all the time. My mom got into bits. It was just kind of understood that half the time when we'd be speaking, we'd be doing some type of bit. And so yeah, if my dad caught me talking to a banana saying, "May I take your jacket?" he would make fun of me. But it wouldn't be like, "Are you a weirdo?" He would understand that I was doing a dumb bit just for me. And I like this specific bit in particular, taking a banana peel off and saying, "May I take your jacket, lol?" Because it's just so adorable, it's cute, it's innocent, and it's like a fun thing just to make the monotonous action of peeling and eating a banana more interesting. And look, I'm not gonna say that the coworker has no joy in his life or whatever, because I'm sure, like I said, it would be weird to hear someone speaking to a banana, especially if there's someone you don't know that well. But I do like this response that Angelina responded to the original tweet with, "Me, speaking to banana. Did you hear something?" Because I think it reinforces the fact that it's not relevant whether or not other people can hear Lil Jon Lovitz. The bit is not for other people. It's for him and his banana. And a similar bit that someone responded with, which I found equally adorable, is Cramblin Duvet says, "One single time when I was 20, someone told me if you knocked on a banana before you peeled it, the peel would come off easier because you said hello and didn't surprise it. And I still do it every time 14 years later." And just think of the tiny itty-bitty dopamine hit that Cramblin has got every single time she's opened up a banana for the last 14 years. That adds up to a good bit of happiness. When I was looking up references to this tweet, the main thing I found is that a lot of different people have speculated about fictional characters doing this bit. For example, Carol says, "Sokka is the type to peel a banana and be like, 'May I take your jacket, sir, lol?'" Now, I'm not really familiar at all with Avatar: The Last Airbender or The Legend of Korra, but my brother's longtime girlfriend Megan is. She named her cats Sokka and Katara, and so I asked her if this was accurate, and she said, "It took me a couple reads to get it, but I could see him doing that, as long as the rest of the gang was there rolling their eyes and yelling at him." So it appears even in that universe, there is the coworker character. Someone said that Bucky Barnes in the MCU would be peeling a banana saying, "May I take your jacket, sir, lol?" And then Sam Wilson, the Falcon, would say, "Do you think other people can't hear you?" Now, I think it's accurate to say that Sam would say that, but I don't know if Bucky is the type to say, "May I take your jacket, lol?" I could see him being talked into knocking on the banana as a superstition, but he just doesn't seem like a big bit guy. And then someone put this conversation in the context of what I believe are the 12-year-old versions of the characters from Supergirl. I don't know nearly enough about Supergirl, and I don't really know anyone who knows a lot about Supergirl to make sense of this, but I'm sure it's very funny, and I'm sure that the Supergirl fanfic community laughed it up, and good for them. I think it's important to remember in times like these, and any other times, that joy is not a finite resource, and if you can extract a tiny bit of joy out of regular moments in your life, go for it. There's very little downside. The downside might be a weird look from a coworker, but in the grand scheme of things, That's not that big of a deal. You had a fun moment with you and a banana. Follow for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing, where you can do things like vote on what I cover for Subscriber Sunday, and you can get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter episode where I cover a thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter. Later today, I'll be covering R.I.P. Bozo, where I showed up to my hater's biggest funeral, so subscribe if you want to see that. On April 25th, 2015, Mike Fossey tweeted, "It's stupid when girls say they can't find a guy, yet they ignore me. It's like saying you're hungry when there's a hot dog on the ground outside." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Once you see this tweet, it's really astonishing how many guys on the internet sincerely say what this tweet is mockingly saying. And I think the root of it is that there are just a lot of young men on the internet, for lots of reasons, who refuse to or cannot see women as three-dimensional people. Because they know damn well that if one of their friends said, "Oh man, I'm so lonely, I need a girlfriend," that friend is not literally meaning, "I will date or sleep with any woman that walks by me." And I think what makes this Mike Fossey tweet so evocative is that hunger is something that all humans experience. And we all know that if someone says, "I'm hungry," they don't literally mean that they will eat anything. And for humor purposes, a hot dog on the ground outside is a great way of describing the type of man who constantly complains that women don't want to date him. And I think laying it out like this shows how unhealthy it is to talk about interpersonal relationships this way. Look, I know people are saying that we need to be sensitive about the male loneliness epidemic. It's caused a lot of problems that we're having with young men these days, and I understand that it's a thing that I should do. But frankly, I just have no sympathy for any guy who is unwilling to understand that women are full-fledged human beings, and if a woman does not want to be with him, that might be nobody's fault, but it also could be the guy's fault. And the thing is, it's really easy to not be like the hot dog on the ground outside. Yeah, it obviously helps to be handsome, but if you're just a decent person to be around, who's funny, who maybe has a couple skills that make them interesting, it's really not that hard to get people, women included, to like you. I think that there's a culture online that is fed into by influencers who want to keep these young men miserable, that convinces young men that if a woman doesn't want them, that means that their standards are too high, that they just want a Prince Charming, when the reality is they want someone who is kind, who is attentive, or maybe is just more compatible. To relate it back to the tweet, it's like if Mike Fossey followed up and said, they don't want to eat the hot dog on the ground because they only eat caviar. And it's like, no, there are plenty of women who don't want to just eat caviar. There are plenty of women who will eat Taco Bell. There are women who love Arby's. All you need to do is be Arby's. Being a hot dog on the ground isn't good enough, but being Arby's is good enough. Just be Arby's. And there were two comics I saw people respond with the Mike Fossey tweet to that showed the type of attitude that Mike Fossey is mocking. Like this comic that shows a woman saying, "I'm so lonely," shutting a door to lots of guys with roses. This is like the Mike Fossey tweet because we don't know anything about these guys. They're at her door with roses, but like, that's not enough. That's not what human relationships are about. I think it's just because of the person I am. I just find it so bizarre that people want to game out human relationships like this. Like, whether or not you want to be in a relationship with someone should be about whether or not you get along, whether you have chemistry. Like, the idea that it would just be about, like, availability is so deeply weird to me. I actually have almost no ability to understand it. This comic from the incredibly healthy Twitter account, Why Women Get L's, basically has a woman saying, "I want a nice, sweet, caring boyfriend," and then she gets a letter from an angel that says, "You already friend-zoned him, bitch." Once again, it's like the Mike Fossey tweet, because this tweet takes away the woman's agency to decide what type of man she wants to be friends with and what type of man she wants to date. It really feels like guys on the internet think that the reason the woman is not going to eat the hot dog on the ground is because she's simply too stupid to know that it's food. And obviously, I'm not saying that you can't complain about dating, but I think we all know that there's a difference between complaining about how the way dating can be and making general statements about women that you never would make about any other group of people. And it's especially silly when guys say things like, "Oh, women only want buff jack dudes." And it's like, I have seen many out-of-shape, balding weirdos with women on their arms. So it's not that. And to me, having the Taylor Swift realization, the "it's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me" realization, is incredibly liberating. Because if all you need to do is just be a moderately better person, that's much easier than trying to play the complex game that people want to tell you dating is. You don't even need to stop being a hot dog. If you just go from being a hot dog on the ground to being a hot dog in a hot dog cart, there are going to be women who want to eat you. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing. We get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, a series where I talk about a big thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On December 7, 2018, Sadiq tweeted, "Why do bash deadbeat dads for not being there for their kids, but we never question if the child has bad vibes, or if they're just unpleasant to be around?" This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. If someone ever tries to legally prosecute the case that men ain't shit, this tweet will be Exhibit A. Because this guy really is out here saying that we should not bash dads that are not around for their children, because maybe the kids have bad vibes. It's just an incredible statement. It makes me giggle to think about. Every time I see it, I laugh. It's one of the best tweets ever tweeted. And as multiple people have pointed out, it's astonishing that a tweet this bad and this mocked is still up. So I have to tip my cap to Sadiq for that. He didn't delete it, but seriously, man, what the hell? For those of you who are still on Twitter, yes, I was inspired to do this one because of the whole saga this weekend with the guy who said he was going to meet his daughter for the first time and then posted a photo of him and a girl who looked to be at least 7 or 8. And then the whole timeline was like, wait, why have you not met her until now? Are you a deadbeat? And then people found old tweets where he was criticizing deadbeat dads, specifically saying that deadbeat dads cause their daughters to do things like hit the pole. And so lots of people were inspired to reference this tweet from Sadiq. And I think what makes the Sadiq tweet so special, besides the fact that it's such a dumb take that lots and lots of people dunked on, is that if you actually imagine someone saying it out loud, it is uproariously funny. Like, just actually imagine a guy saying to his baby's mother, "I'm sorry, I would love to be here, I would love to help you raise little Johnny, but he's got such bad vibes, he's so unpleasant to be around." Like, it's such a silly thing on its face, but he's so sincerely being like, "Hey man, you can't blame a deadbeat dad, the kid might just suck to be around." And the response from basically everyone, but particularly women, is that being a parent is not about having a good time, it's not about good vibes, it's about being a parent. You have to raise your kid no matter how bad their vibes are. Shortly after this was tweeted, comedian Kev on Stage had a great video talking about exactly this subject. I recommend you watch the whole thing, but here's a short clip.
All children have bad vibes. When they're babies, all they can do is cry. That's not a vibe. I don't pick up a crying baby and go, it's a vibe. It's a anger. It's a frustration, but it's not a vibe. Babies can only cry, and then they grow up and they poop up their back. That's not a vibe. Poop up the back is not a vibe. I hate poop up the back.
And not to be the super serious guy, but the really sexist thing that Sadiq is implying is that men should have a choice of whether or not they want to be around a child with bad vibes. But the woman, she just has to grin and bear it no matter how bad the vibes of the kid are. Also, I love the idea that a child is born with a specific set of vibes and that a child's vibes might not be related to, I don't know, their dad not being around. Yeah, sorry you got some bad vibes from a kid who resents the fact that you only come over every so often. And when people said all the things that I've been saying, Sadiq followed up by saying, "Very disappointed with the replies to this thread. Attempted to spark an open discussion, but people just want to be mean." I love how he thinks it's not an open discussion just because everyone disagrees with him. Like, you can have an open discussion and 99% of people can be open to saying you're an idiot. And obviously there were people who somewhat agreed with him. The main thing they agreed on is that some kids do have bad vibes, and yes, that is true. There are some children that are just deeply unpleasant to be around. But once again, that misses the whole issue. It doesn't matter what a kid's vibes are. I am absolutely positive that there were many moments in my life growing up where I had awful vibes, that I was really unpleasant to be around. And guess what? My parents still parented me, because they didn't sign up to be a parent because they wanted good vibes the whole time. It's just so funny to me that he thought he was making an astute observation. He was like, whoa, we bash deadbeat dads, but what if they have a good reason for being deadbeat? What if they don't like what it feels like to parent their child? It's like, yeah, that's obviously why they're deadbeats. This tweet is quoted and referenced to pop culture all the time. For example, someone quoted it when talking about this last season of House of the Dragon. Someone said it's the plot of the 1976 film The Omen, which of course is about the Antichrist, so that makes sense. And then someone made it seem like the tweet was being said by Henry, the main character of David Lynch's Eraserhead. I will say, the baby in that film does have bad vibes. Awful vibes, horrible vibes. If your child is the Eraserhead baby, you do have my permission to be a deadbeat. That's fine. For reasons you can Google, someone posted a photo of NBA Hall of Famer Karl Malone under the tweet. And for reasons I am incredibly curious about, but there's no real way for me to search it easily, someone said on February 11, 2023, that this tweet described Kenyan Twitter today. Evidently, there was some discussion on Kenyan Twitter where people were making an argument similar to Sadiq's. I'm sure it was messy and beautiful. The reason why the Sadiq tweet took off so much, in my opinion, is because the wording is so silly for the seriousness of what it's talking about. He is talking about abandoning a child, and I think talking about bad vibes in that context is so incongruous. It's so unserious for the seriousness of the topic, you can't help but laugh at it. But I do think it's part of a very large trend on Twitter, and I feel like that this is the case in a lot of social media apps. I'm just mostly familiar with Twitter, where people will think that they're making some intellectual point or ask an intellectual question when all they really want to do is just be let off the hook for doing a bad thing. I don't know if Sadiq himself is a deadbeat dad, but at the very least he imagines himself in a situation where he would want to be a deadbeat dad, and he's preemptively trying to forgive himself by being like, whoa, it's not my fault. The kid might have bad vibes. You really don't need to go out of your way and get ratioed just because you want to make peace with a bad decision you're thinking about making. If you're going to do something crappy like abandon a kid, just do it. Don't try to intellectualize it. Don't try to make it seem like you're justified in that choice. Because believe me, if you abandon a kid, and then 20 years later you're having lunch with that kid, going over why you weren't there, it doesn't make you look better if you say, hey, it wasn't my fault. You had such bad vibes, I had to go. Follow me for a new tweet every day, and consider subscribing. You get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing I was big on the internet but did not start on Twitter. Also, you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On August 31st, 2020, Matrix Reloaded tweeted, "People on here will tweet anything. Charlie Brown had hoes. No, he didn't. That isn't true." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Matrix Reloaded did not make a novel observation when he observed that people will come onto Twitter and tweet anything. You really can tweet whatever you want, no matter how true it is or not. But he caught lightning in a bottle when his example was Charlie Brown had hoes. Because it is both a claim that is silly on its face to most people, is about something that's not important, but is also definitely a thing you could imagine someone tweeting without any qualifiers. And I think that that's what's so perfect about it. A Charlie Brown had hoes tweet requires the person to do no couching whatsoever. They just have to state a thing that is either definitely not true or might not be true, as if it is completely agreed upon fact. The impact of this tweet is almost exclusively with it being referenced to other tweets. People will see a tweet and say, this is a Charlie Brown had hoes tweet. And because of that, I have examples falling out of my ears. In case you don't believe me when I say that people will tweet things as inane as Charlie Brown had hoes, look at this tweet, which was accused of being a Charlie Brown had hoes tweet, where this person says, SpongeBob was a slave. Or let's look at this one that says, the truth is that the Beatles popularized wokeism in the United States. These are Charlie Brown had hoes tweets because they're tweeting a thing that is completely controversial, that is definitely not a thing that is completely agreed upon, as if it is as simple as saying that the sky is blue. If you want to, for example, log on and say that the New York Mets are the team of the gentrification class, you can do that, but that is a nonsense claim out of nowhere and is as insightful as saying that Charlie Brown had hoes. Alright, let me just run through some tweets that people accused of being Charlie Brown had hoes tweets. Crypto scams are what happens when you defund the police. Funny enough, we had the most friends when we were the worst version of ourselves. Cyclops would have had a Blue Lives Matter sticker on his bumper. Jessica Simpson had Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, and Mariah Carey shaking, crying, and crumbling when she released this classic. California abolished zoning in 2019. It has only made things more expensive. Gravity is satanic. Look, if a tweet can effortlessly be used by 2000s pop Twitter, X-Men Twitter, and Yimby Twitter, it's a very versatile tweet. And while Charlie Brown had hoes gets all the shine, I think the last two sentences, no he didn't, that isn't true, are really integral to the tweet's success. Because they're just so earnest. There's no joke there, he's just saying no he didn't. That isn't true. I feel like the simplicity of those sentences underlines how obviously untrue the Charlie Brown had hoes type claim is. And I think the internet brings Charlie Brown had hoes claims out of people. Because in real life, you see people's body language, you see that you're talking to another person, and you know you have to make a convincing argument, you might need to couch some things, you might need to lead your way to making a big claim, but on the internet, you're always just staring at a blank page. And so, if where you want to get to is the claim that Charlie Brown had hoes, you'll just say it. You won't ask someone, hey, how do you feel about the peanuts? Oh, you see the peanuts? You see Charlie Brown's doing this? Yeah, I don't know if you ever thought about it this way, but I think Charlie Brown, he was a player. You don't need to do that on the internet. You could just go straight to saying Charlie Brown had hoes. And on the internet, you don't get a raised eyebrow, you don't get a huh. Even if people disagree with you, they disagree with you in text, and you can just be like, oh, that's just an idiot disagreeing with me. In real life, it's a lot harder to make crazier claims because you immediately feel social judgment. A parallel conversation since the Charlie Brown had hoes tweet came out is, wait, did Charlie Brown actually have hoes? And there have been multiple examples of people posting panels of Peanuts comics that imply Charlie Brown might. Like this one, where Charlie Brown is getting yelled at, saying, Charlie Brown, you said I was your girl, and yet I saw you down at the drugstore today with Patty. And Charlie says, alright, I admit it, I'm not above that sort of thing. Now if that's true, one might construe that to mean that Charlie Brown had hoes. Like, I don't know if it's a definitive piece of evidence, but it definitely leads some credence to the notion. Now, I won't show you the image because I refuse to show anything with AI on this page, but someone did an AI-generated image of Charlie Brown and a girlfriend, and someone quote-tweeted it and said, now, using the power of AI, we can finally unlock the possibility of Charlie Brown having hoes. Now, this tweet is obviously not about whether or not Charlie Brown actually has hoes, but I do love on Twitter that everything's a little bit meta, so people do discuss whether or not he does. And maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. It's hard to say. What I can say for sure is that I love that this tweet just became a part of the Twitter vernacular. vernacular. When someone says Charlie Brown had hoes on Twitter, everyone knows what it means. That's wild. This is just a random thing that a fan of the Matrix sequels tweeted. And as a fan of the Matrix sequels, I'm sure he appreciates that the tiny lines of code that went into sending this tweet have had a massive impact across the human race. Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing where you get the Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing where you get the weekly museum of not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on some other part of the internet other than Twitter. Also, you can vote for what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On February 20th, 2013, Jay Nalv tweeted, I'm sorry, Miss Jackson. I am for eels, never meant to make your daughter cry. I am several fish and not a guy. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Well, that's certainly the most effort I put into the opening of one of these. Was it a waste of time? Probably, but it was pretty fun. And how else to present this tweet, which is a wonderful song parody, without performing the song parody yourself? And obviously, I do not have the singing voice of Andre 3000, I do not have professional mixing, but I figured it was worth a shot. A thing I want to make clear almost immediately is that this is a song parody of Outkast's song Miss Jackson. I didn't think I needed to make that clear, but I saw this tweet from Rowan McBean which says, I'm in this one Discord server that skews quite young, and someone just shared the I'm sorry Miss Jackson, I'm for eels thing, and the number of people who did not know it's based on a real song or who knew but have still never heard said song is making me insane. Which kind of confuses me, because one, if you use context clues, it's pretty obvious it's a parody of something, and two, I can't imagine it's very funny unless you have it to the tune of the actual song. Also, if I can teach just one youth that Outkast has some serious hits, my job here is done. Now, the art of the Twitter song parody is long and storied. Honestly, I've probably done 100 of them myself, and they almost never take off. But I think the reason this one took off is because it blends an absurd picture with a lot of the down-to-earth lyrics of the actual song. Because the actual song is, I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, woo, I am for real, never meant to make your daughter cry, I apologized a trillion times. I think the fact that he keeps the first and third lines the same is why this tweet is so funny. He doesn't change those lines to make it more appropriate about an eel. He sets up a scenario in which this main character is doing the same thing as Andre 3000 in the song. He is apologizing to a woman for making her daughter cry. It's just in this case, instead of apologizing a trillion times, he's for eels and is insisting, I am several fish and not a guy. And that wording is just so perfect, because it's almost like he's clarifying what you just heard. Like, did I mishear him saying for eels? And it's like, yes, you did hear for eels. I am not a guy, I am several fish. This is an extremely visual tweet, obviously, and it has inspired multiple people to draw it. And this is just a great comic from illustratedinternet.com, where someone illustrated every line as a different panel. I think it's just wonderful. The eel spilling out of the suit, A+. And then there's this drawing, which I couldn't really find a source on, where the eels look very sad and contemplative, that they know that they made Miss Jackson's daughter cry, and they don't feel good about that, but they are several fish. They're not a guy. And this is related to a joke I found very funny from Danny Boy Harvey, where he tweets, 4 eels in a trench coat. One of them says to the others, I think we owe Miss Jackson an apology. A phenomenon I found multiple people talking about is hearing the song Miss Jackson in the wild and either on purpose or inadvertently singing the parody lyrics. This person actually got called adorable by a customer, so that's a win, I guess. And before you ask, yes, people often do caption videos of actual 4 eels with the caption, I'm sorry, Miss Jackson, I'm 4 eels. And let me just say, I'm no fan of the way eels look. No disrespect to them, because they don't really control the fact that they look like that, but like, they look like that, and that doesn't sit right with me. I know people want to have the attitude that all of nature's creatures are beautiful, and I agree with that in the abstract, figurative sense. I think that they're all beautiful that they exist. But some of these animals are ugly. We don't know the backstory behind why the 4 eels are singing, but just by the nature of being 4 eels, I think they definitely could make someone's daughter cry. Like, we don't know how old this daughter is. If this is like a 6-year-old girl, I think just seeing 4 eels in a tank might make a 6-year-old girl cry. And a 6-year-old boy, for that matter. Let's not be gendered. Okay, now I'm just riffing. This is an iconic, great tweet. It's inspired so much riffing on it, like I was just doing, and it's the gold standard, in my opinion, of song parody tweets. I don't have much to say because it's just perfect, and I sang for you up top. What else do you want from me? Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing to get the Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter once a week, and you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On October 17, 2017, FabDLT tweeted, ew, she fucked the weed man for weed? A bitch that's fucking the text man for text. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Look, I'm not the intended audience of this tweet really, but I think it's fair to say that this is the most influential relationship tweet of all time. When you seek out people talking about it, you see many, many people basically saying that it changed their lives. Mina here says that it set a foundation of self-esteem within me that I could never get anywhere else. And this weekend, a creator named Kath made a video briefly talking about this tweet that I got tagged in a lot. And my initial reaction after the first few tags was, okay, I don't want to do this now. I don't want to steal this person's thunder. They just talked about it. Let me wait a little bit. But then I kept getting tagged. And so what I did is I reached out to Kath and asked if she wanted to come on the show to talk about her reaction to the tweet, making the video, how she feels about it now. And she said yes. So I talked to Kath. Here it is. So Kath, you said that this tweet changed your life when you saw it. You said that you remember where you were when you saw it. Can you explain to me the difference between the Kath before this tweet and the Kath after this tweet?
I think truly the Kath before this was definitely a bit more like Carrie Bradshaw among my
Mm-hmm.
friends, you know? And then the Kath after, for sure, she is a bit more realistic about like, oh, this is the text man. You know,
Mm-hmm.
you got to be realistic about where you are standing in someone's life. Like he is specifically not he's not that into he's just not that into you, you
Yeah.
know? So you
Mm-hmm.
just it was that dose of realization that I didn't have prior to this tweet.
And I think what this tweet breaks down when it compares the text man to the weed man is the transactional nature of it. And has that affected the way that you view, even if it's not literally the text man, like what you're getting out of any given relationship?
Ooh, that is a very good question. I think a little bit so, because I think relationships in general, like even friendships, family,
Mm-hmm.
they are transactional, you know,
Mm-hmm.
like to varying levels, of course. And I think it's important to recognize absolutely like yeah, what truly are you getting out of it? Like, are you getting emotional fulfillment? Are you getting
Mm-hmm.
any type of fulfillment from it? And so I think the text man tweet, it for sure, it called all of that into question for everybody.
Yeah, because I think the thing that's so powerful about it is that it can be read to be like you shouldn't be in a transactional relationship, but I think the way that you read it, which is the way I read it, is like if you're going to be in a transactional relationship, all you're getting out of it is text.
Exactly. Exactly. It's like it that's why it felt so hard hitting for I mean, of
Mm,
course it could apply to anybody. It doesn't have to just
yeah,
apply to women, you know, of
yeah.
course. Um but yeah, no, in that transaction, exactly what are you getting out of it? Like, is it just these little crumbs, these little crumbs? Is that
Mm,
all this person has to offer to you?
hmm. And so, what do you do now when you find yourself in a situation where you're like, "Oh, this might be the text man"?
Change their contact.
Wow.
Change their contact. You can start doing text man 1, text man 2, text man 3, whatever you have to do.
Hmm.
Like it will bring you it'll be that dose of reality that you really need. Like Fab DLT, like she gave us that dose of reality and I think
Hmm.
sometimes we also have to give it to ourselves.
Absolutely wonderful. And if you could thank her, what would you say to her?
Fab DLT, you're an absolute scholar. Thank you so much for everything you have done for women, for everybody, honestly, but
Yeah.
you know, especially for women here. God, she had commented on my video actually about it, and
Wow.
oh my gosh, I felt like I was meeting
Hmm.
the president of the United States.
Hmm. I mean, she really, it's an important text. It's an important text. I want to thank Kath again for coming on, and I'm really glad she came on because if it was just me, I'd be speculating about what it's like to be a woman in the modern age of dating with guys that only want to text, and you don't want to hear me speculate about that. Kath and I discussed most of why this tweet's powerful, but I think an important thing about it too is what it says about the weed man, because I think the point she's making in some way is like, hey, he's actually giving you something tangible. You can't do anything with a text. A text isn't going to help you relax at the end of the day. In fact, a text will just make you want to wait for another text. Like here, where Lex the writer said that she let the weed man hit, and Moody Girl points out that it could be worse. It could have been the text man in exchange for texts. Or here, where Jinx uses this kind of off-putting cartoon of a cartoon taking off her panties, I guess, saying that it's because he gave you an update on his day without you asking. And guys being dude correctly is like, wow, the bar is so low that it's just text, just a text on what your day is? Is that really all you're expecting out of a relationship? This tweet occasionally gets referenced in regards to real life, like Ali Galoob points out that the whole story about RFK Jr. and Olivia Nuzzi, that she wasn't even fucking the text man, she was just getting the texts. And honestly, I don't even want to imagine what a sex from RFK Jr. sounds like. Ugh. People have compared it to fiction. Veet here says that this tweet is something that Rue would say to Cassie. This is a reference to Euphoria, a show I don't watch, but there's only so many shows that have a character named Rue in them. There's context as to why, but it's not important. Someone put this tweet in the words of Matthew McConaughey's character from True Detective Season 1, where he says, she's grossed out by some chick fucking the weed man for weed. Meanwhile, she's fucking the text man for text. man is a doomed and delusional animal that's just gotta be fucking for something. I am not good at impressions, but I will do them at every opportunity. Look, I think the power in this tweet is that it clarified a modern phenomenon that no one had really put words to before. I think there are a lot of people like Kath who had not conceived of the fact that what they were getting out of a relationship was nothing more than tiny crumbs via text message. And women, and people in general, deserve more than that. And with that in mind, you probably should not judge people who are getting material benefit from sexual encounters, like, an illicit drug or money or things like that, because all you're getting is just a text message. And so Kath is right. Meeting Fab DLT is like meeting the president. She deserves some type of prize for this. This is such an important text, and now I am glad that all of you tagged me in that, so I did this one now. You guys were right. Follow me for a new tweet every day, and consider subscribing where you can get the Museum of Not Twitter, a weekly show where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On May 7th, 2012, Victor Wanyama tweeted, "I had spaghetti. It was very nice. I enjoyed it." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Sports Tweet Saturday, and our long international nightmare is over. I'm finally doing a soccer tweet. And yes, I'm going to call it soccer because I'm American. There are different dialects of language, don't be weird about it. This was a tweet I was not familiar with before I started this series, but when people were suggesting I do tweets about soccer and I asked what tweets should I do, this one came up multiple times. And I'm glad it did. It has a rich history, and it's just a very positive story. Victor Wanyama is a Kenyan soccer player who has played in multiple places in Europe and currently plays in Montreal, but this was tweeted when he was playing for Celtic FC. He grew up a fan of Celtic FC, which is a team in the Scottish Premier League, so it was a big deal for him. To be clear, I'm borrowing heavily from Wikipedia. I'm just not a gigantic soccer fan. I don't know these things, I apologize, but he's a really impressive player. He was the first Kenyan player to play in both the Scottish Premier League and the English Premier League. Now in 2012, he was training for Celtic FC, and he got home around 6:30, and he needed to eat, so he went to a restaurant alone, and he explained to Football Scotland.
I went to this restaurant and I ordered pasta, and then I loved it. And it was really nice. I had to tweet about it.
This interview was almost a decade after the tweet, and it's so nice to see that he has such a positive attitude about it, and he's still thinking about how much he liked that pasta. This is reminiscent of a tweet from a certain Greek freak who plays for the Milwaukee Bucks about a smoothie, but we'll cover that when we cover it. And the innocence of Wanyama's tweet has followed him his whole career. When he signed with Tottenham Hotspur, the announcement was made with a photo of him wearing one of their kits, holding dry spaghetti in his hands. Just recently, during his time in Montreal, someone brought a sign that said, "We'll trade spaghetti for kit," and sure enough, he traded his kit for a box of what looks like Barilla spaghetti. And the official Montreal FC, or CF Montreal account, actually put out a video of him and the team chef making a spaghetti dish together. It's really wonderful. He's so sincere and earnest about how much he likes making the spaghetti. He shows off some pretty good knife skills with some basil. I recommend watching it in full. An early criticism people had of Twitter and a lot of social media is, I'm not going to sign up for something just to see what other people are eating for lunch. But as things have gotten more toxic, I think a lot of us would prefer to just read what people are having for lunch. Personally, if you post something that's delicious on your timeline, particularly if you made it, my ass is gonna like it. And the thing about the Wanyama tweet is, unlike so many other times when people post meals, this was not a curated photo of the most trendy restaurant, and it wasn't perfectly shot with a high-definition camera. No, it was just him talking about how he ate some spaghetti, it was very nice, and he enjoyed it. We didn't even know what restaurant it was. And I thought about making a joke saying, how good could spaghetti possibly be at a restaurant in Glasgow? But the thing is, you can get good Italian food in most major cities in the world. Let's not be ridiculous. And honestly, it doesn't even matter if it was great spaghetti. He enjoyed it, and that's what matters. I don't know what his history with spaghetti was. I'm not going to assume he's never had spaghetti before. Maybe he hasn't, but I'm not going to assume that. But at the very least, this was an important spaghetti to him. And I think we like seeing our young athletes, particularly our young athletes who come from outside of the country they play in, to have these moments, because it's like, wow, yeah, they're living the dream. Things as simple as eating spaghetti make them so excited they need to tweet about it. I'm worried that that's slightly condescending to foreign athletes, and I don't really want it to be, because I think that there is a happy medium between being like, this foreign athlete doesn't understand anything, they're basically a babe in the woods. I think that that's really bad. But I also think we should be able to appreciate when a foreign athlete comes and appreciates things that we take for granted. And I also think we'd be better off if we tweeted or blue skied or whatever we're doing these days more posts about spaghetti that we had that was good. As you saw at the beginning of this episode, I made myself some spaghetti tonight. Yes, that was because I was doing this episode, although spaghetti's in my regular rotation of dinners anyway, so it wasn't like I was going far afield making spaghetti. And It was pretty good. I enjoyed it. And you know what? Maybe I should have tweeted about it. Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing so you get the Museum of Not Twitter, a weekly series where I cover a thing that's big on the internet that did not start on Twitter. Also, you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On January 1st, 2022, Death Carpets tweeted, "Getting queerbaited by the Marvel Cinematic Universe is like losing at chess to a dog." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Subscriber Sunday, where my TikTok subscribers get to suggest and then vote on which tweet I cover. And this one was one I always wanted to cover. It's a thing I have a lot of expertise in, but I'm glad they selected it today. For those who don't know, I have co-hosted and produced a podcast about the MCU and superhero movies generally for almost 8 years now. And so the MCU and all of its trappings is a thing I know a lot about. And yes, there is a long storied history of people getting queer-baited by the MCU. It is up for debate how much intentional queer-baiting the MCU has done. It has done some. Some might be in the eye of the queer-baited, but let's define that term before we make any pronouncements. A super official sounding definition comes from the Oxford English Dictionary, which says, "The practice of incorporating apparently or potentially LGBTQ+ characters or relationships into a film, television show, etc., as a means of attracting or appealing to LGBTQ+ audiences while remaining deliberately coy or ambiguous about the character's sexuality, or more generally, the practice of trying to appeal to or capitalize on LGBTQ+ audiences or customers in a deceptive or superficial manner." Put another way, it's when movies and TV shows will play around with characters of the same gender flirting or doing things that will be interpreted as romantic if it was characters of opposite genders. They play around with that without ever committing to any of those characters being queer in any meaningful way. So Tumblr shippers and montage makers can make montages of these characters, flirting or joking around in such a way that suggests they might be romantic, but on the actual screen, you never see anything that is a deliberate sign that a character is gay or a character is a lesbian or something like that. And what makes it queer baiting as opposed to just an ambiguous relationship is when the show or movie plays that up in a way of trying to attract audiences that are looking for a queer relationship, but then they don't actually have the follow-through to make a character queer. And in a lot of ways, I think that that's unfair, because there are only so many queer relationships in super mainstream media, and when people want to see those in their favorite properties, teasing them and then not having the guts to follow through with it is kind of shitty. One of the most famous examples of alleged queer baiting is the characters of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson on the BBC series Sherlock. This is such a notable example that is the example on the top of the queer baiting Wikipedia page. An example that members of my Discord insisted I include, even though I never watched the show, is Dean and Castiel on Supernatural. Apparently this was a whole to-do. In fact, it's actually the top example in the Oxford English Dictionary definition that I gave earlier. And a super famous one outside the MCU that I was even aware of, even though I'm not on these Tumblr pages that a lot of this is discussed, was Poe and Finn in Star Wars. And honestly, man, you can just see that if you watch the movies. Like, if you just watch the sequel trilogy, John Boyega and Oscar Isaac clearly have the most crackling chemistry of any of the two leads, so they should have just done it. People were already yelling that Star Wars became too woke because they dared to have Laura Dern with purple hair in it, so you should have just gone all the way. But to go back to the tweet, getting queer-baited is a thing that you do have some control over. Obviously, there are times where they lay it on really thick. But also, when you're watching the sequel trilogy, at least me, I know that Poe and Finn are not going to end up together. And so if I make any emotional commitment to them ending up together, that's partially my fault. Now, my opinion on this doesn't really matter because I'm a straight guy. I'm not the audience that's looking to get queer-baited. But I do think that that's an interesting part of the discussion, is how much of it is the person's responsibility. And that's what this tweet's about. This tweet is about the idea of allowing yourself to be convinced that there is going to be an explicitly queer storyline in a product made by Disney. The reason why Death Carpets compares getting queer-baited by the MCU to losing at chess to a dog is because she's saying that you have to be pretty stupid to do it. Now, I'm more sympathetic to the type of person who gets queer-baited by the MCU, but she does have a point. If you were looking to a flagship series from a multinational corporation doing business in almost every country in the world to get good, honest queer representation, you're gonna be disappointed. The Walt Disney Corporation is simply not going to be on the front lines of pushing queer representation, even if the creators who make the stuff do care about that sort of thing. And there's an article in the Journal of Feminist Scholarship by Elizabeth A. Jankowski, which I thought was illuminating. It's called Queer Baiting in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it gives some examples, and I disagree with some of them, but I think it's a good starting place for a discussion. For example, Elizabeth mentioned Steve and Bucky in the first Captain America movie as an example of queer baiting, and I don't personally agree. I think that this tweet from Lizzie Lemon Drop sums up my feelings somewhat, but I think there are definitely things that the characters say to each other that could be construed that way. But to go back to the original tweet, to earnestly think that the Walt Disney Corporation is going to make Captain America gay, I think is silly. Even though they should do something like that, that would be a good thing for the world if they were to make an iconic American character gay. That would be a good thing socially. But if you actually are expecting that to the point where you get disappointed when it doesn't happen, you might be losing at chess to a dog. I'm sorry. And there are other small examples alluded to in that article by Jankowski, which you can read, but I think the actual most egregious example of the Marvel Cinematic Universe actually doing queerbaiting is in regards to Valkyrie. Valkyrie is Tessa Thompson's character in the Thor movies. There's actually a cut scene from Thor Ragnarok where she apparently had a one-night stand with a female character, but they cut that out of the movie and they never actually explicitly addressed it. And in the next movie, Thor Love and Thunder, she talks about being in a same-sex relationship with another Valkyrie, but we don't see her at all. We don't see this relationship. We don't see Valkyrie, doing anything queer on screen, really. And they really hyped this up on purpose. Natalie Portman even said before screening that it was so gay, and it's just not. And then they did it again in The Marvels, where there's clearly something going on between Valkyrie and Captain Marvel, and apparently they cut out a line where she says that they were better as friends, implying that they actually dated, and instead they just have, a scene which is so obviously flirty, but they don't actually address it directly, and it just leaves a sour taste in your mouth, because you're like, this is only not explicit because some executive thought it would piss off the censors in insert country. I do think it's notable that both Thor Love and Thunder and The Marvels came out after Death Carpets' tweet because, like I said, they're the most egregious examples in my opinion. Loki's also pretty egregious, where they have Loki just mention offhandedly that he's bisexual. And the thing I said about the creative people wanting to be more explicit about this, I think is true, where Kate Herron, the director of season 1 of Loki, talked about how she's bisexual and it was important to her to make Loki canonically bisexual. But I think that gets at what people find so frustrating about the MCU's queerbaiting, is that outside of the non-existent queer relationships, the actual existing queer relationships in the MCU are so lacking. Because Loki is canonically queer in the MCU because he says that he's bisexual, but he's never been in a queer relationship. And the first canonically queer character in the MCU is not even a superhero. It's just a tiny line from one of the directors of Avengers Endgame, Joe Russo, where he says when he's in, the group therapy that Captain America's running after the snap, he says that he went on a date and he uses the word he to describe the person he was on a date with. Technically speaking, this guy was the first gay character in the MCU. Congratulations, folks. And the first canonically queer major character in the MCU was Phastos, a member of the Eternals, who also happens to be responsible for the nuclear bombs at Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So, take that. And of course, his husband's a mostly anonymous character, and his queerness is not that essential to the storyline. Now, before it premiered, people accused Agatha All Along, the most recent MCU Disney Plus series, of being queerbaiting, because Aubrey Plaza said things about it like, quote, "It better be, because that's what I signed up for," when asked if it was the gayest MCU project yet. And I understand that. I understand being skeptical. And I'm sure that queer people found it lacking in some ways, but I would argue that it is the first project that is explicitly not queerbaiting. They reference characters being gay, and guess what? The climax of the show is two women making out. And I am obviously not the arbiter of whether or not something is queer enough. I don't want people to tell me the ways it was lacking. I'm sure that there are ways it was lacking, but I would say that this is an example of them actually following through on a promise that it was going to be very gay. I'm not the perfect person to judge, but I would say it's objectively the gayest thing the MCU's ever done. Both the main character and the main supporting character are gay. They're gay on screen. Aubrey Plaza was correct when she said that's what she signed up for. As to why this happens has a lot of complicated explanations. I don't think that there's a one-size-all thing about people getting queer-baited by big properties. Matt, I think, has a good point here, where people just want to be represented by something that they consume, and they're willing to look into things more than maybe other people won't. I think that Capricorn's Groove is absolutely right here, where they say that the problem isn't necessarily queer-baiting, it's that the Marvel properties are just so sexless that everything is subtext. There's really no major romantic relationships on screen, at least in the way that movies and TV usually have. And people who follow my show know that Marvel not having sex scenes is a thing that I've talked about before. A lasting legacy of this tweet outside of the specific confines of the MCU or queerbaiting generally is that, like losing chess to a dog, is a great way of saying that doing something makes you stupid. Like, going into a Ridley Scott movie expecting historical accuracy is like losing chess to a dog. Getting manipulated by Dream is like losing chess to a dog. And then Demi Dijwibe says something that I feel deep in my soul. Getting rage baited by Golden Globes categories is like losing chess to a dead dog. Because seriously, they do that every year. Every year, a movie will be submitted as a comedy that's clearly not that funny. And it's like, were you born yesterday? Like, just wear a sign on your forehead that says, "I don't know a lot about movies," before you tweet, "I can't believe this is being nominated as a comedy." The Martian was a comedy. Get Out was a comedy. It's dumb, but we get over it. Sorry, that just annoys me so much. Look, the way I ultimately come down on this original tweet is that it's nuanced. I think the point that she's making is true, that you should not look to things made by big corporations to give you good queer representation, and if you look too closely into it, it somewhat is on you. But it's very true, too, that big properties like to lean into the idea of queer representation in order to get queer audiences. They clearly want to play up some of the mildly gayer elements of what they're putting out there to try to cultivate a gay audience, but they don't want to commit to actually having explicitly gay elements in their stories. And that, like I said earlier, sucks. I think the wise thing to do when wanting any sort of representation or anything positive from media made by a big corporation is to demand a lot, but be comfortable with not being that disappointed if you don't get it, because you're probably not going to get it. Follow me for new tweet every day and consider subscribing so you can do things like suggest and vote on tweets that I cover on Sundays. And also you get the Museum of Not Twitter, a weekly series where I cover a thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter. On October 31st, 2014, Rita Ora tweeted, "Dropping my new song Monday if this gets 100,000 retweets." The next day she followed up, "By the way, my Twitter got hacked. Somebody is threatening to release new music I've worked really hard on. Nothing comes out until I'm ready." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. There have been a lot of lies told on the internet, but this one from Rita Ora ranks up there. It's clear what happened. She thought that she was going to put out a tweet asking for 100,000 retweets, it would get those 100,000 retweets, and she'd triumphantly be able to say, "Hey, here's my new song on Monday." And that is not what happened. The tweet ended up getting to about 2,000 retweets, so more than in this screenshot, but it got nowhere near the 100,000 retweets. She then deleted that tweet and then said she was hacked. Now the thing is, she is expecting us to believe that someone hacked her account, and instead of doing a normal hacker thing like tweet something offensive or try to sell stuff from the account, they threatened to release music if they got a certain number of retweets. Look, this is not a novel observation, but what she's saying makes no sense at all. And for those who don't know, Rita Ora is a British pop singer who is not a nobody. She definitely has a lot of fans. She definitely could get a lot of retweets on a tweet, but especially back in 2014, she was not in 100,000 retweets territory. Because that's what happened here. She did not understand the amount of followers you need in order to reliably get 100,000 retweets on a tweet. Apparently at the time, she retweeted someone who said, "Where are her 3.9 million followers at when you need them, SMH?" And 3.9 million followers is a lot, but it is definitely not enough to expect to get 100,000 retweets on anything you post. It might not seem like it, but you really can't expect more than like 0.5% of your followers to engage on anything. For comparison's sake, I looked up every tweet that Justin Bieber tweeted from October 31st, when this tweet was tweeted, to the end of November 2014. At the end of the year of 2014, I can't find a number for November 2014, Justin Bieber had 57 million Twitter followers. And in the entire month of November, he only had one tweet that got over 100,000 retweets. And keep in mind, this is 100,000 retweets since he tweeted it. I have no idea how many retweets it got in the few days afterwards. Basically, even on her best day, Rita Ora was never going to get 100,000 retweets on anything. This is why, for better or worse, people have social media managers. Because a social media manager will be able to say, "Hey, the follower conversion rate to a retweet is really not that high. If you want to do something like this, maybe lower the bar to 5,000, make it something tenable." And then I wish someone in her corner were to say, "Hey, just delete the tweet, put your head down, ignore it. People make fun of you for a few hours, just don't address it." Because frankly, Rita Ora just was not a big enough deal back then for anyone really to remember that she did this if she didn't later say that she was hacked. Especially given that she still has the tweet where she says she was hacked up, which someone said makes her stronger than the Marines, and they're kind of right. People often compare situations where people lie about being hacked, or when they make a promise to do something at a certain amount of retweets or engagements and it doesn't happen, they compare that to this Rita Ora fiasco. Like when Netflix said that their anti-password sharing measures were a mistake and weren't meant to be put out, when only 1% of the 33 million Google puzzles for Taylor Swift's 1989 Taylor's version were solved. Or as one Reddit commenter put it, me when I was 11 and posted, "Anyone who has a crush on me, like and comment," and nobody did. Look, I'm sympathetic to Rita because there have been times where I've tried to do projects or I've had ideas that require a certain amount of input from other people, and I don't get anywhere near that. And what I do is I just put my head down and move on. Like seriously, she should have done that. I'm sure professionals might disagree with me, but I would say just never, ever, 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 ever say you were hacked. Because once again, we know what hackers do when they actually hack someone important. Like, unless I see your account trying to sell MacBooks, I don't believe you were hacked. Now, I will say, if she was actually hacked, it's one of the greatest hacking jobs of all time. Like, in terms of negatively affecting the person you hacked, this is a masterful piece of work. Follow for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing where you get access to the Museum of Not Twitter, a series where I talk about a big thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On August 17, 2017, LeBear Girdle tweeted, "Dentist waiting room. Me. Chanting. Teeth. Teeth. Other patients. Teeth. Teeth. Secretary. Pounding her clipboard. Teeth. Teeth. Teeth." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Some tweets are funny for very complex reasons, but this tweet is funny because it's very funny to imagine a whole dentist's office chanting, "Teeth, teeth, teeth." Because for starters, it's funny to imagine a group of strangers chanting any random phrase. But then to act like the thing that would be chanted at a dentist's office would just be teeth is hilarious. As if being in a dentist's office entrances you into saying, "Yes, teeth, teeth, teeth." Because I'm not sure if this is intentional, but in my mind's eye, either everyone's eyes are going white like they're being possessed in a horror movie, or they're chanting it as if it's some type of ritual in order to appease the god of oral health. From a stylistic standpoint, I think it's really nice how it builds, how teeth is initially in lowercase, then it becomes uppercase, and we get the secretary pounding on her clipboard as if she's getting more into it than anyone else was. It's sort of like a slow clap of a chant. And this tweet really is just one of those canonical Twitter jokes. Even Fred Delicious, one of the icons of weird Twitter, says, "I remember exactly where I was when I first saw this tweet." The official account for Steakum says, "I have come back to this tweet 4 times today for laughs. Thank you." And LeBear Girdle kept encouraging people to actually do this at a dentist's office, and one person, Joanne Stassen, says, "Just made it happen in the hospital room with my sister, who is waiting for a CT scan before she can be released. Don't get me wrong, still grateful for our healthcare system here in Canada." Now, there's no video, so we cannot confirm or deny whether or not Joanne actually did this, but I'm willing to trust her. I'm a trusting person. A big influence this tweet has had is that people will kind of quote it, but replace the word teeth with other words depending on the situation. Cooper Co. says that when Dune 2 was about to come out, they kept saying Dune, 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 Dune. Sauna Insider jokes that Jesus, the disciples, and Mary Magdalene started chanting feet, feet, feet. When Home Field Apparel was teasing that they're going to have a Georgia Tech line, Kyle says bees, 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 bees. And probably my favorite is that when the metaverse made a big announcement that avatars were going to have legs now, Michael says legs, legs, legs. Now, I can't be positive that this person who captioned photos of their teeth tattoos with teeth, teeth, teeth was quoting this tweet, but I'm 95% sure. A thing about absurdist humor, particularly in text, is that you can't really know if it's going to work until you try it. I'm sure that LeBear Girdle thought this was funny, but there's no way, in my opinion, that they knew that it would be their most popular tweet of all time. And one of the beauties of Twitter in its heyday is that you were just throwing so much crap at the wall, it didn't matter. You would just keep trying stuff, and occasionally, something you did would stick. But I do really think the secret sauce to this is that there's just something inherently funny about someone chanting something in an inappropriate time. Like, my twin brother was on Twitter until like 2015. He never was a big tweeter, it never was his bag, but he has a tweet that I think about all the time, which I laugh at, and this is what it is. Stands up during an important business meeting. Stanley Tucci. Stanley Tucci. And I think it's funny for the same reason. It's funny to imagine someone just getting up and chanting something, whether it be in a business meeting or a dentist's office. Teeth, 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 teeth. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing to get the weekly museum of not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On September 13th, 2021, Nicki Minaj tweeted, "My cousin in Trinidad won't get the vaccine because his friend got it and became impotent. His testicles became swollen. His friend was weeks away from getting married. Now the girl called off the wedding. So just pray on it and make sure you're comfortable with your decision and not bullied." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. There was a lot of misinformation about the COVID-19 vaccine in 2021. There's still a lot of misinformation about it today. Most of it is extremely harmful and has cost a lot of lives. But this particular example of it is extremely funny. That doesn't mean it's not harmful, but it's extremely funny. There are just few things funnier in the history of the world that have ever happened than a gigantic music star getting on the internet and saying, "Hey, be skeptical of this vaccine. My cousin's friend took it, and his balls got really big, and now he's impotent. And oh yeah, because of his giant balls and impotence, his fiancée called off their wedding." Like, what a wild series of events. The reason why Nicki tweeted this in the first place is because she had tweeted about how she was not able to go to the Met Gala in 2021 because they required proof of vaccination. Which makes sense. This was 2021. COVID was still all the rage. Obviously, COVID is still out there, but this is the time when a lot of people weren't vaccinated. Thousands of people were still dying every day. It was still an incredibly pressing issue. And the last thing Anna Wintour needed on her conscience was a bunch of famos getting sick. And so when people responded to Nicki by saying, "Hey, you probably should get the vaccine, it's safe," rather than refuting any of that science with science, she gave the most third-hand example you could possibly think of. Like, if you have to make up an unreliable anecdote, starting it with "my cousin and Trinidad's friend" is a good place to start. And so yeah, that's one of the big reasons it's funny, because it's so unreliable sounding, but also, there's just something so funny to imagine this poor guy in Trinidad opening up Twitter and being like, Nicki Minaj is saying, "What about my balls?" A thing I did find frustrating when I was doing research on this tweet is that a lot of people joke about it as if it was Nicki Minaj's cousin who had swollen balls. And yes, that would be funny, but I think it is so much funnier that it's her cousin's friend. Because look, if someone tells you that their cousin is suffering from a certain ailment, you're willing to believe them. People generally know the general news about their cousins. I know some sicknesses that my cousins have dealt with, but I have no working knowledge of my cousin's friend's ailments. Saying something happened to your cousin's friend is about as reliable as saying something happened to a person in a video you saw on Facebook. Now, a lot of people give serious responses to Nicki's tweet, including Josh Gad, because whenever I see a celebrity putting out COVID misinformation, my first thought is, I wonder what the snowman from Frozen thinks about this. More seriously though, the health minister of Trinidad and Tobago had to make a statement about the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine, basically refuting the story of anyone's balls getting enlarged and someone becoming impotent because of it. Now, a lot of people made jokes about this. Patrick Monahan, comedian, inserted this story into a comic anecdote about the fact that Mr. Belvedere sat on his balls once and had to stop filming for a few days. He said instead, one time the guy who was Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend got swollen in his own balls and they had to stop getting married for a few days. Olympian Adam Rippon did a Halloween costume where he pretended to be Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend. I'm blacking it out, but he had balloons representing swollen balls. And Pablo Torre pointed out that Sam Cassell and Nicki Minaj's cousin's friend both were telling people about your giant balls after taking a shot, as Sam Cassell's celebration was to pretend he had giant balls. I don't know if I can show that on here, so I'm not going to. This took off for a lot of reasons, one of which is that Nicki Minaj's popularity and her Q rating has really plummeted in the last few years. I mean, mostly because of answers to questions like, hey Nicki, why can't you and your husband buy a house anywhere near a school? On top of that, I think it really represented how stupid the COVID vaccine misinformation was. Like, if a millionaire who has access to better doctors than I will ever meet can only come up with, my cousin's friend got swollen balls, then like clearly there's no truth to the conspiracies. As someone who got the vaccine as early as possible, I use the fact that I have OCD as a way of getting it early. Apparently that was a comorbidity in New York, so that was fun. But anyway, I got it in March of 2021. And so the fact that in September of 2021, people were still hemming and hawing about it was incredibly frustrating. And so there was something cathartic about having a day on Twitter where everyone was just making fun of someone who was dragging their feet about getting it. And on top of that, it's really hard to overemphasize how funny it is to think about someone getting balls so swollen their fiance calls off their wedding. Like, COVID vaccine or not, that is just the funniest thing I've ever heard. Like, no matter the context, if someone said to me, hey, I know someone who got balls so swollen their wedding was called off, I would laugh about it the whole night. And so the fact that a major celebrity was using an anecdote like this in order to explain to people why they should not get a life-saving vaccine for a global pandemic, that is just a perfect confluence of idiocy that could only exist on this cursed timeline. And if we can't take a moment to laugh at that, we can't laugh at anything. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing so you get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On September 10th, 2018, Loser Crew tweeted, I fucking love toast. What absolute genius took a bite of bread and was like, cook it again? Unreal. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. I got home later than usual, so this is going to be a quick one, because the tweet basically speaks for itself. Josh observes correctly that toast is incredible. And believe me that I feel it in my soul, because longtime viewers know I am a sufferer from celiac disease. That's the disease where your body cannot process gluten. I've had it for like 3 years now, and so I cannot emphasize enough how much I miss toast. Yes, I miss pizza, I miss bagels, I miss a lot of things. But just a piece of fresh toast with melted butter, I miss it so badly. And if you're thinking to yourself, Jake, you can just make it with gluten-free bread. That's how I know you've never had gluten-free bread in your life. I would truly pay $500 right now to eat a piece of toast without having any intestinal issues. And why this tweet is so popular, like seriously, this is an extremely popular tweet. If you look up toast tweet, this comes up. The reason it's so popular is because Josh breaks down how simple a concept toast is. Like, bread already exists, and the only innovation that toast brings to the table is just cooking the bread again. And bread is something that's already cooked, so someone who's never had toast before might be like, wait, how could cooking the bread more make it a fundamentally different and better food? And oh my god, it does. And yes, there are other foods you can improve by cooking again, like a twice-baked potato, for instance. But a twice-baked potato involves adding other ingredients, same with something like burnt ends. Burnt ends is technically just, brisket, a piece of brisket that's cooked again. But even then, it's chopped up and it's mixed with barbecue sauce and stuff like that. Toast is just cooking bread again. And I love the scenario that Josh imagines, that it was just one guy who took a bite of bread and was like, this isn't good enough, you gotta cook it again. Now, I did check Wikipedia to see if there's any story of when toast was invented, and obviously there isn't just one guy who invented toast, but apparently the first references to it come from 1430, and it was originally used as a way of making stale bread edible, which makes sense because a lot of the history of food is just trying to make food that's gone stale edible. Like, that's half the reason people use spices until the 20th century. The actual science of what makes makes toast toast is that by heating it to between 150 and 190 degrees Celsius, you cause the Maillard reaction to occur. The Maillard reaction is a chemical reaction between sugars and amino acids. It's what makes seared steaks taste so good. Of course, the absolute genius who invented toast was not thinking this. He was probably thinking, ugh, this bread is stale. Let me put it over the fire some more and hopefully that'll make it taste better. And thank God he did. It brought us toast, and it brought us this tweet, which is just such a funny expression. It's really hard to explain why, and this is why it's a short episode, because it's like, yeah, this is just a funny way to talk about how good toast is. So let's give a toast to toast. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing to the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I talk about a thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On June 25th, 2015, State Champs tweeted, JFK gay as fuck for falling asleep when Jackie fat ass out like this. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Today is the anniversary of JFK's assassination, so if it was ever appropriate to do this tweet, it's today. And if you're saying, no, it's never appropriate to do this tweet, agree to disagree. Because I'm sure this video is in no one's feeds, but this is an important tweet, I have to cover it. Without extremely silly, morbid jokes, Twitter would not be Twitter. Because that's the thing that I think makes this tweet so special. Yes, it is incredibly morbid. It is talking about moments after the President of the United States was murdered. But the actual joke is just noticing that in this photo, Jackie's ass looks fat and JFK looks like he's asleep. Now, in the actual tweet, the photo's not blurred, but you know, I'm putting this on TikTok. But yeah, it's a morbid joke insofar as the subject of the joke is someone who's just been killed. But there's no actual commentary, there's nothing grander to say about JFK, it's not an incisive joke, it's just a really silly observation. Now, a thing I was disappointed to learn, which I guess makes sense when I think about it, is that this is actually not a photo of the JFK assassination. Now, when I realized that, I'm like, duh, why would a photographer be right there in the line of fire? It actually is a still frame from a 1977 TV movie called The Trial of Lee Harvey Oswald. So the observation that State Champs is making about the fatness of Jackie Kennedy's ass is actually an observation about the ass of Christine Rose, an actress who went on to be in such shows as Heroes and How I Met Your Mother. And once again, it does make sense that this isn't a real photo from the day, because it's staged so perfectly. You can see Jackie trying to get help in the same frame, you can see JFK kind of passed out in the seat, and apparently in the actual real incident, Jackie was not reaching for help as she was trying to grab pieces of JFK's brains, and his brains aren't everywhere, which makes this a photo that's easier to look at, but also makes sense that it's not the real assassination. But the fact that this joke was made and that it became so big, I think is just evidence of the fact that people, especially the type of people that are on Twitter, are willing to make jokes about basically anything that happened before they were born. But if you're born in the 80s or 90s or 2000s, the JFK assassination is so abstract, it really does feel like a thing that you can just joke about. And there obviously is a thrill to making a joke about something that you know is dark. That's why dark jokes exist. And yes, if I was related to JFK, I would probably not find this tweet that funny, but I think it is mostly harmless. Because once again, the butt of the joke is not really JFK the man. The joke really only exists because of the way that this photo is staged. Now, a thing that this tweet is definitely riffing on is the whole, like, fellas, is it gay too type phenomenon. Like, Amanda actually quoted this tweet with a screenshot of a woman saying in earnest, it's gay as for a man to take a nap. It's just very funny to imagine a person who in earnest would look at a photo of a man just assassinated and think, man, he looks pretty gay right now. Something I did enjoy reading is where Condoleezza Rice Updates says that today I learned that Dairy Queen will not let you get this tweet on an ice cream cake. I do wonder if their opinion would change if they read the article that I did saying that it's not actually a photo of the assassination, but it's probably fair that Dairy Queen did that. I do wonder what JFK would think if he knew that 52 years after he was assassinated, people were making jokes about it on the internet. Now, obviously, his first question would be, what's the internet? Yeah. But if you explain the internet to him and he got it, I wonder if he would be like, that's awful. Or if he would be like, okay, cool, the country moved on enough that they're able to joke about it. The answer is probably the first one, because he was a politician and politicians are ambitious, and so he'd probably be a little upset that the nation was not still in mourning for him, but I do think there is some truth to the second response. One of the best things about America is that we do have the right to hold nothing sacred. And yes, if you hold certain things not sacred, people will yell at you, people will say that you're a bad person. And sometimes you might be a bad person. There are some things that we probably should hold sacred just as human beings. But I think that presidents who have been dead for 50 years getting mocked about the way they died is completely fair game if we're going to live in a country where we do not worship our politicians, where our politicians are not kings. And if you get to be the most powerful person in the free world, I feel like people mocking you long after you died is a fair price to pay. So rest in peace, JFK. I hope they do not have Twitter in the afterlife. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing to the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I talk about a big thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On March 4th, 2012, Terry McLaurin tweeted, I hate when it's my week for dishes. On March 18th, he tweeted, tweeted, "We need a maid. I hate doing dishes." On November 15th, he tweeted, "I hate doing the dishes." And on November 28th, he tweeted, "Hate doing the dishes." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Sports Tweet Saturday, and we're going back to the well of things athletes tweeted when they were teenagers before they became famous. When, a few weeks ago, I covered Jerry Judy's questions about Big Bird, a lot of you recommended I talk about Terry McLaurin and the dishes. Terry McLaurin is a wide receiver for the Washington Commanders, but at the time he tweeted these tweets, he was 16 and 17. And man, did teenage Terry hate doing the dishes. The phrase, "stars, they're just like us," is thrown around a lot, but in this case, they are just like us, because man, I hate doing the dishes. I love living in New York City, but one of the biggest rude awakenings for me is when I realized, oh wait, I'm gonna have to hand wash my dishes for the foreseeable future. I don't want to sound bougie, but I grew up with a dishwasher my entire childhood, and then when I became an adult living in New York where no one has dishwashers, I really started to resent doing the dishes. Like, the last thing I want to do after I sit down to eat a meal that I prepared is get back up and have to wash all the dishes I just used. I know I have to, I know I'm being lazy, but man, I hate doing it. And so I see completely eye to eye with Terry here. The thing that makes this series of tweets great, though, is that it's a series of tweets. If he just tweeted, "I hate doing the dishes," that would be a fun thing to see and be like, Terry hated doing the dishes when he was a teenager. But it's a thing he thinks about a lot. The first tweet reveals to us that him and his siblings must have had some type of schedule where he says, "It's my week for dishes." The second tweet reveals that he wishes he was richer so they could pay someone to do the dishes. Of course, it's fun to think about how now he almost certainly pays someone to do his dishes. And then the last two in November of 2012 were just, "I hate doing the dishes." And then the next one, he was so angry about doing the dishes that he got rid of the I and the G and just said, "hate doing the dishes." Obviously, these tweets would not be funny if they were tweeted by just some rando, but it is always a little funny to me to look back at people who are multimillionaires because of the discipline they have on the football field and see them tweeting nonsense like any other teenager. Okay, I shouldn't say nonsense because I myself just made the point that I hate doing the dishes, but you know what I mean. Like, I hate doing the dishes, but I'm a 28-year-old man. It would be kind of weird if I just tweeted, "hate doing the dishes." Like, it's a very teenage thought to be like, man, I hate doing the dishes, gotta let the world know. I'm not 100% sure when these tweets are resurfaced. I see that this guy Dots by Daniels was the first person to tweet about them in 2022, but I'm not sure if they were first discovered by someone maybe off of Twitter, or the tweet where they were discovered was deleted. Tweets get deleted all the time, especially now. But like the Jerry Judy Big Bird tweets, these tweets became a thing that people just joke about in reference to Terry McLaurin. Like, People's GM here says, "Feeling like Terry McLaurin the way I'm sick of doing the dishes," and Lewis says, "Nobody. Terry McLaurin after doing the dishes," and then a gif of Steve Harvey being upset. I was gonna end on a joke about maybe him having to do a worse chore instead, but honestly, thinking about it, I think dishes are the worst chore. Like, yeah, I did grow up with a dishwasher, but I did also grow up with a dad who cared a lot about the way that things were arranged in the dishwasher, so I didn't like doing dishes even when I had a dishwasher. And the other chores, I don't know, I feel like are just a little bit easier. Like, taking out the trash, unless it's bad weather, is usually fine. Cleaning off the table is usually fine, especially if you have a tablecloth. It's just dishes, they take so long, your hands get hot, you have to scrub stuff off if it's cooked on. Terry is absolutely right. He spoke a truth to the nation. The dishes are awful. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing to get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover everything that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On May 22nd, 2020, Dolphin Dom tweeted, "Fun fact, blueberries are the only fruit named after a color." Rina Sawayana responded, "Star fruit?" Dolphin Dom replied, "So close. That is a shape." This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Subscriber Sunday, where my subscribers suggest and then vote on which tweet I cover. And this is an absolute classic. In the past, I've shared tweets of people tweeting something stupid, and I've assumed they're being sincerely stupid and not joking, and people have gotten mad at me about that. So I'm going to get out in front of that this time and say I'm going to assume that both Dom and Rina are being completely sincere and honest. They could be joking, but honestly, if they are, I don't have as much to say about this tweet. So for the purposes of this video, I'm going to assume that Rina is being completely sincere when she asks Starfruit, and Dom is not being jokingly condescending, that she actually is saying so close and being encouraging. But I want to acknowledge that this could all be a bit, but if it is a bit, honestly, I think it's less funny. Because to me, it is extremely funny to imagine a person thinking that a starfruit is named after a color. And it's even more funny to imagine someone earnestly being like, "Hey man, that was so close, but that's actually a shape." But let's talk about the first tweet. Blueberries are the only fruit named after a color. A lot of people replied to this tweet saying, "What about oranges?" And that actually gets to, I think, why Dom is tweeting this. Because I think the fun fact that Dom is actually alluding to with this tweet is that the color orange was named after the fruit and not the other way around. Now, I still don't think what Dom is saying is true because blackberries are named after a color, but oranges are not named after the color orange. The color orange is named after oranges. Rina Sawayana was not the only person to give a dumb answer. Brandon here says green, and Dom responds, "Not a fruit, good try though." Although Brandon is definitely trolling because he responds with a photo of leaves. I'm just now realizing that Dolphin and Dom's photo is not a photo of them, it's a photo of Donatella Versace, so I should not be saying she. But let's just keep going. Like I said, the thing I actually find most funny about this exchange is that the final line is like words of encouragement. It reminds me of the thing that Bill Hader once said to Seth Meyers when he was talking about why he broke so often when playing Stefan on Weekend Update.
A person being patient with an insane person is my favorite thing in the world. Like, anybody would be like, dude, get out of here, you're not doing your job right. I specifically asked you, get out of here. But instead, anytime I would say something and you go, now, Stefan, I would start laughing.
In the same way, Dolphin Dom is being extremely patient with Rina Sawayana by saying so close. There's no reason for Dom to show that much patience. They should just say, no, you idiot, that's a shape. And the hearts are the cherry on top. And this is, I think, the place where if this is a joke, I find it less funny than if it's serious. Because I think if this is a joke, the hearts are a bit much. They're a bit putting it on too thick. If it's sincere, then it is the piece de resistance of the whole exchange. Now, exchanges like this happen all the time on Twitter, whether joking or not. It really does happen a lot on Twitter, not even as a joke, because people on there can be really dumb. Like this poor guy Ben Jones tweeted, "This will be the first presidential election since 1976 to not have a Biden, Bush, or Clinton on the ticket." And Donut Juice points out that all of the exchanges under that tweet are like the so close that is a shape tweet. Just as an example, this guy who has a Joe Rogan profile photo says, 1996, John Kerry versus Mitt Romney. And poor Ben Jones has the patience to say, Bill Clinton was on the ballot in 1996, John Kerry ran against George W. Bush, and Mitt Romney ran against Obama and Biden. And the original exchange aside, I think the reason why conversations like this are so common on Twitter is because the amount that someone actually knows, the knowledge that they have in their head, is not really related to how willing they are to try to correct people. Unfortunately, there are very few people who all they know is that they don't know nothing. Most people who know nothing think that they know a lot. But the great thing about this exchange is that it's given a great rebuttal when someone tries to correct you with something stupid. You can just say, so close, that is a insert thing. Like here where a non-opinion says that there's never been a remake better than an original movie, which, for the record, that's completely untrue. But Roddy Nielsen responds, Godfather 2, and Irrational Actor responds, so close, that is a sequel. It can be used as a quote, like here when Shirts That Go Hard posted a photo of a Dunkin' Donuts colored Boston Red Sox hat. Liz responds, so close, that is a hat. It can be used in a completely silly way, like when the NHL posted Jack's back and Wildcard Spot Haver responded, so close, that's his front. But I do think it's best when it's used completely condescendingly, like when Radek responds, Life in 2013 with a bunch of screenshots of video games, and Double Doink quote tweets it and says, so close, that is actually video games. Look, someone could write a book of a million ways to condescendingly call someone stupid on the internet, and it really wouldn't be enough. So close, that is an X is one of the best ways to do it, and I'm glad it exists. That is the thing I feel strongly about, whether the original exchange was a bit or not. But I do just think it's so beautiful that this all came from the distinction between color and shape. Truly the most basic bits of knowledge that we have as humans. You learn what the colors are and what the shapes are around the same time you learn that the cow goes moo. Fall for a new tweet every day, and if you want to suggest or vote on tweets like this on Subscriber Sunday, become a subscriber. You also get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing on the internet that did not start on Twitter. One's coming later today, so if you subscribe today, you'll get a new episode today of that. On November 11, 2019, Rube tweeted, snowing hard this morning. Bus driver slid through a red light. Only thing he said was, we slidin'. I can't stop thinking about this. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It was snowy in the Midwest last week, so lots of people requested I do this tweet, and it is appropriate to do. Because anyone who's ever lived in an area where it snows can relate to the feeling of being like, uh-oh, we're just sliding right now, aren't we? Like, personally, I've never actually been driving when sliding because I grew up mostly in Florida, and then when I moved up to New York, I lived in the city the whole time, so I've never had a car. So I've never been at the wheel when we sliding, but I've definitely been in a situation where I'm like, oh, this is bad, we sliding. But I think the thing that Rube captures that made this tweet so popular is that sometimes in the face of a perilous situation that's mostly out of your control, all you really can do is just observe what's happening. Because by the time the bus driver in question tried to stop at that red light, once they started sliding, there was nothing the bus driver could do. All he could do was just observe, yep, we are currently sliding. And the fact that he just said, we slidin', makes it all the more great. If you look at the location on the tweet, you can see that Rube is located in Chicago, and so this tweet makes a lot of sense because there actually was a record amount of snowfall for November 11th in 2019. A thing that Rube added, which I think I kind of assumed even before reading this, is that we slidin' is said in the same way you'd say, oh lord, he coming. So perhaps it's more accurately, we slidin'. He also did ponder what it would be like if the bus collided with a parked car, and the last words he ever heard on Earth were, we slidin'. Now that's not ideal, but at the same time, I'm like, there's not really good last words to hear if you die in a car accident. I guess what I mean is there's nothing that a bus driver could say before your bus crashes that will make the death better. And so if he says, we slide in, at least you go into the afterlife knowing exactly what happened. Sir, what was your cause of death? Yes, St. Peter, it was sliding. A lot of people can relate. Lots of people have quote tweeted this and say that anytime they're hydroplaning or on ice, they say we slide in. Now, some people actually had stories of sliding in a bus. Like Eric here says, as someone who once wrestled a 12-ton school bus full of children at an icy hill and stopped inches from a parked car, yeah, sometimes we slide in is all you can say. Or Lindsay relays a story of me driving the Rutgers Quidditch team in a van through the streets of Philadelphia in the winter of 2015. I imagine that had to be extra hard because some dork in the back was like, Accio power steering! And Gabriella replied to the tweet with an actual gif of a bus sliding out of control and hitting a car. I will say, when it's going slow enough where it's not really a danger, it is always funny to see a bus sliding around. And Dull Bunyan quote tweeted it with, saying we slide in whenever I lose control of anything doesn't get old. And I think this is interesting because it shows that you can say we slide in when it's not literally a vehicle slide-in. It's not quite YOLO, but there are a lot of times in our lives that we are caught up in something that we don't really have control over. And the best we can do is just be like, yup, we sliding. Because it's often worse to try to fix something you can't fix. It's often worse to try to fight against sliding when all you're doing is sliding. No matter how much the wheel is turned or whatever, a bus driver is not going to stop a bus from sliding until the ice wants it to stop. That might not actually be true. I've never driven a bus before, so I apologize. But metaphorically, you understand what I mean. In a strange way, I feel like this tweet as a metaphor is helpful now more than ever. Because with all the bad stuff going on in the world, sometimes the best you can just say is, we slide in, and focus on what you can control. Because we slide in doesn't seem optimal, but it is much more optimal than panic. And it also sort of implies that the bus driver's been there before. Because if I'm in a bus that's sliding, I would rather the bus driver say we slide in, as if he doesn't consider it that big of a deal, than him completely freak out. Because if he completely freaks out, I'll freak out, because it's like, man, this guy drives a bus for a living. He thinks something bad's about to happen, something bad is about to happen. Look, this tweet is extremely funny, and I'm extremely envious of this bus driver. Not because he's a bus driver in Chicago, that seems like it might be a stressful job, but because clearly his blood pressure is lower than mine. Because if I was driving a bus and we slid like a centimeter, I'd be like, no, we're all gonna die! Please follow for a new tweet every day, and consider subscribing when we get the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big somewhere on the internet but not Twitter, and you also can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On April 17, 2014, the Furlinator tweeted, "Event happens. But how does this affect me, the protagonist of reality?" This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. We're all guilty of this sometimes, but some people are guilty of it all the time. And I think that this is a really great way of putting it in the internet age. Because yes, people being solipsistic, the idea of acting as though one is the only person to actually exist, that's not a new phenomenon, but on the internet, I think with posting, there's a way that people really put that front and center. In a way, all of us having our own feeds and our own brands kind of nudges us in the direction of only being able to process events by how they affect us and how they can be turned into a narrative about us. That's not to say it's not reasonable to look at major events initially through how it affects you or people you care about, but if that's the only thing you're really thinking about, if that's where your thought process stops and ends, you might be in this tweet. And I think the type of person that the Furlinator is mocking is someone who does this all the time. The type of person who sees a natural disaster on TV and thinks, wait, let me post about how I visited this place once when I was 7 years old, instead of thinking, oh my god, I hope that the people there have all the help they need. I think a great example of this is a tweet that Jack Wickham wrote in 2019, referencing the Furlinator tweet where he said, "Thoughts and prayers to everyone who traveled to Paris and has a pic of Notre Dame saved on their phone. This is about you, the protagonist of reality." Of course, he's referring to when the Notre Dame church burned down somewhat, and if you were on the internet on the day that happened and the days after, you definitely saw lots of people acting like they lost a family member just because they happened to visit it once. Jeremy McLaurin in 2016 pointed out that a really common time that this happens is whenever a famous person dies. Like, if a famous person dies, everyone will rush to tweet the one anecdote they have about their work, about meeting them once. And that's not to say that there's no value in that. Like, if you actually met someone who's a famous person and they actually affected your life in a real, tangible way, I think that that's fine to share. But if your story begins and ends with, yes, I met him once outside of a show and I shook his hand and that's it, you don't need to share that. Put it another way, if you saw someone else post that, would you care? Is it not the case that you only care because it happened to you and you think that you're the protagonist of reality? And beyond being annoying, I think that this behavior can actually be harmful. As Sarah Kelly points out, this was kind of the attitude that a lot of white people had during the summer of racial reckoning after George Floyd was killed. People, and I think white people in America more specifically, and this even includes me, have a really hard time ever internalizing that something is not about them. Especially because when something is not about you, often the best thing for you to do is just to sit down and shut up. Like I said, I think the reason that this tweet is so resonant is because it does describe an annoying type of person, but it is also something that has been true about all of us. Because the world is chaotic and crazy, and it's indifferent to us, and so a lot of times the easiest way for us to make sense of something, or to comfort ourselves about something, is to conceive of ourselves as the protagonist of reality. Like when Patrick Claybon was asked how he feels about jinxes, he says, "They're another example of us looking for patterns to explain outcomes we experience as the protagonist of reality." Because of course, believing in jinxes in sports or anything requires one to think that the universe cares at all about your individual actions. As you've seen, these tweets are not actually quoting the Furlinator's tweet, but I looked it up and no one had ever used the phrase the protagonist of reality on Twitter before him, so I think that they all got it from him. Now, a question that the Furlinator himself actually asked is, did this tweet come before or after main character syndrome became a widespread concept online? I actually looked this up, and according to Google search trends, main character syndrome didn't really become a thing that was searched a lot until like 2018, so definitely. Now, I think main character syndrome is more widely known these days, but in terms of real Twitter heads, it always will be the protagonist of reality. Like Spencer Hall tweeted, "Off-leash dog people, what is it like being the protagonist of reality?" He didn't tweet main character, because he's a real Twitter head. Same with Mr. Chow, who says, "Cannot stand when people are like, folks are just faking liking a thing I don't get. Very sorry you carry the burden of being the protagonist of reality." And that goes to show how this is normally used these days. It's normally used mockingly towards people who treat themselves like the protagonist of reality, because that is the best response to someone acting like the protagonist of reality. They just deserve to be mocked, because it's an extremely childish notion. And none of us are impervious to adopting childish notions in times of stress, in times of craziness, but when people adopt it all the time, when it's their general posture to act like they are the protagonist of reality and the world should bend to their whims, they deserve to be mocked in the same way a 7-year-old deserves to be mocked for doing that. Okay, maybe you don't want to mock a 7-year-old, but you know what I mean. Lastly, I think the phrase protagonist of reality is what gave this tweet so much staying power. I think it's actually more effective than main character syndrome, because in some ways we are the main characters of our own life, and I don't think that that's a wrong way of looking at one's own life. But protagonist of reality puts in stark terms what you are effectively saying about yourself when you act like everything revolves around you. Like really, you want to look someone in the eye and say, yes, I am the most important person in all of reality, in the entire known universe. From every animal to every one-celled organism, it's all revolving around me. And when you put it like that, people who act that way sure seem really ridiculous. Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing with the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and you can also vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On January 14, 2015, Merman tweeted, "No rapping tonight. Why? You rap about Patrick Swayze every time. It's embarrassing." Okay, after one beer. Uh-oh, y'all, it's getting kinda hazy. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. I think there's something really special about a joke where the punchline occurs in the reader's head. You don't need to read the rap getting to Patrick Swayze, because you know it's getting there because it rhymes with hazy. Yes, this is obvious, but I think a thing like that is what distinguishes a Twitter joke that people laugh at for a day and a Twitter joke that people laugh at for a decade. And I think the situation described in the joke is both something that's ridiculous, rapping about Patrick Swayze, but also relatable. We all have that one friend who does that one thing that's annoying after they have a couple drinks. And sometimes that is freestyle rapping. And this should really not come as a surprise to anyone who's watched all of these episodes, but as a teenager, I was the kid who thought he was cool because he do freestyle raps. I wasn't, but I definitely did them too much, and anyone who's friends with me as a teenager, I sincerely apologize. I don't know if I ever rapped about Patrick Swayze, but given that crazy rhymes with Swayze, I probably said his name at least once. And I love the sincerity with which the friend talks to him about this. He's like, "Please, it's embarrassing. We're in public. Don't rap. You rap about Patrick Swayze." You almost can imagine that before the rapping friend got there, the other friends huddled up and said, "Hey man, if he raps tonight, this is gonna be the last time we invite him out." And for your listening pleasure, let me try to do a freestyle that starts with, "Uh-oh, y'all, it's getting kinda hazy." I haven't done this in a while. I'm a bit out of practice, but let's go. "Uh-oh, y'all, it's getting kinda hazy. Met a girl, had to ghost call me Patrick Swayze. All my friends saying, man, I took it too far. But she says, thanks for everything, Julie Newmar." No, that's not good. Much like when I was 17, my problem is still that I will completely ignore flow and syllable count in order to try to say something I think is clever. That's why I stopped doing it. Anyway, with that embarrassment of myself out of the way, this tweet is really referenced often. It's referenced whenever anyone brings up freestyle rapping, and it's referenced when things are hazy. Like Jay Not Now said that he thinks about it every time the air quality is bad. When there's a photo of the Buffalo Bills playing amid some smoke, Catherine Fitzgerald said, "Uh-oh, y'all, it's getting kinda hazy." And similarly, Jamie quote tweeted it when he had a hazy IPA and said, "Uh-oh, y'all, all, when the New York Post ran a headline about Leonardo DiCaprio having a cringe rap at his 49th birthday party, Dragonfly Jones said, "Oh, y'all, it's getting kinda hazy." Now, this does raise an important question. Does Leonardo DiCaprio's girlfriend know who Patrick Swayze is? She was 11 when he died, so maybe she didn't know him when he was alive, but now that I think about it, Leo's definitely described the plot of Roadhouse to her between pulls from his vape pen, so yeah, she knows who he is. Now, a comparison that I cannot get out of my head since I've read it is Victoria says, "This is what the Sabrina Carpenter nonsense outros remind me of." Like, you can just imagine her saying, "Oh, y'all, it's getting kinda hazy. I told my boy, please amaze me. He lifted me up like Patrick Swayze." I apologize. I really didn't intend to have two musical moments when I started this episode. And with this episode, Brent becomes just the fourth person to have 2 tweets in the Museum of Twitter. The people on that list include Drill, who I did a whole week for, Kevin Durant, and Donald Trump. And so now you can add Brent, aka Merman5, to that list. If that's not a sign that the internet can be a great equalizer, I don't know what is. Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing to get the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter. This last week I just covered She's So Crazy, Love Her. Also, you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On November 25th, 2021, Chules tweeted, "Unk is full. Been sitting like this for 45 minutes. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Happy Thanksgiving to all of my American viewers. I felt it was only appropriate to talk about a tweet from a Thanksgiving with something that is vital to Thanksgiving. A family member being too damn full. Or maybe you being too damn full. The thing we all can agree on is Unk in this photo is full." Like, the reason why this is notable and the reason why it went so viral, because a lot of people post photos of their dads passed out on Thanksgiving. It's a pretty yearly tradition. But I think the reason why this one is so viral is because he literally looks like he's about to explode at the seams. Let's go body part by body part. First of all, let's look at his face. This man is under pressure. He looks like he's gonna have a cartoon bead of sweat go right down past his ear. And his stomach. I mean, no disrespect, but he looks like he's 11 months pregnant. Is it a boy? Is it a girl? No, it's 3 helpings of stuffing. And the most important part, his legs. Why on earth is he wearing these pants? Why are you wearing skinny jeans to Thanksgiving? As many people pointed out, there is no way he's getting any circulation in this photo. His bloodstream is as still as a pond with amoebas in it. And he's got the distressed, yellowish, like, what are you doing wearing this to Thanksgiving? At the very least, open up a button. We've all had our legs fall asleep before, but this man's legs are in a coma. And then we get down to his feet, where he's wearing these boots, which my good friend Anthony Canton III, when I asked him if there's anything culturally I might be missing about this photo, he said, "The boots, it's so unk, OMG." What this adds up to is a man who is struggling. And a lot of people relate. Like KD says, "This me after that 3rd plate and nap." And I think that Trey Watt points out that a lot of people I think were hesitant to say explicitly is that boo-boo was creeping up on him. Because that's really what he's worried about. And I wanted an expert opinion on what you do when you get in a situation like this. Because I've eaten too much at Thanksgiving before, we all have, but I don't think I've ever been under this much pressure. So I reached out to a friend of mine who shall remain nameless, but he's definitely an expert. His bona fides to me is I was once at a Thanksgiving at his house, and he ate his 2nd helping, and while he was still in the chair at dinner, he said, "Ugh, I gotta sit." Keeping in mind, he was sitting at the time. He was so full that just sitting was not enough. He had to say, "I gotta sit." And so his piece of advice was as follows. Don't stand up. Stay seated after dinner until dessert, and stay seated at least 30 minutes after dessert. Nurse water until you have to shit. Immediately first stop is the loo. Your stomach is a Jenga tower. You add movement, it's going to collapse. And then he added, if football is important to you, publicly fall on the sword and eat on a TV tray. Insist there isn't room at the table, and don't make eye contact with your wife or mother-in-law. I don't know how much that adds to this tweet discussion, but I think that this is great advice that you should follow if you're going to eat a lot today. Some jokes people have made about this photo include friend of the show Tej calling him Slow Gotti, because yeah, he does kind of look like Yo Gotti. DB says, when you stand on business and the business decides to stand on you. And Tron Vin says, Baron Harkonnen watching the gladiator fights. Which, like, yeah, looking at photos of Baron Harkonnen in Dune Part 2 watching the gladiator fights, that's basically what it looks like. But I do hope that this guy's uncle was able to eventually get up, was able to eventually use the bathroom, and was able to eventually get out of those jeans. Although I do think it's very funny to imagine, like, firefighters having to be called to use the jaws of life to extract him from the jeans. And on a serious note, I do really want to wish everyone a happy Thanksgiving. I think it's important to reflect on the things we're thankful for. I know that sounds super corny, but life moves really fast, and there are a lot of things that we take for granted, and I like that there is a day, even if it has a bad history, where we can sit down and be like, yeah, I'm thankful for all these things I have in my life. And I'm really thankful for the audience I've built on here. I'm really thankful that people like this show a lot. I really can't emphasize that enough. And so yeah, if anyone asks you today what you're thankful for, even if it's from a really annoying aunt, give her an honest answer, because I think it will feel good to put out in the world that you're thankful for something. At the very least, be thankful you wore appropriately loose pants to your Thanksgiving dinner. Follow me for a new tweet every day, and consider subscribing with the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On March 16, 2023, James Medlock tweeted, I'll bet anyone $1 million that the US does not enter hyperinflation. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Before you go running away because this is about economics and economics are boring, know that this story ends with this person winning $1 million. Well, technically not $1 million, but they made a lot of money off of this tweet. So I promise understanding what's going on here and hearing the story out is worth it. Also, I went to art school and I get it, so you have no excuse. James Medlock is a pseudonym. No one actually knows his real name. Well, I mean, I'm sure people in his actual life know his real name, but no one on Twitter knows his name. And in March of 2023, when some people, particularly in the tech world, were freaking out about the possibility of hyperinflation, James Medlock put this joke out. I really can't emphasize this enough. This is a joke. However, tech investor and former CTO of Coinbase, Balaji Srinivasan, did not take it as a joke. He said, I will take that bet. And this is where it gets complicated, and you need to understand concepts like hyperinflation and how Bitcoin works, and I can't explain all of that to you, but I have an expert. Joey Politano is an economics writer who writes the Precipitas newsletter. I also previously had him on to talk about the drill candles tweet, so we discussed the mechanics behind this bet, why it was such a stupid bet for Balaji to take, and why it was so funny that it happened. I want to have some basic questions. What is hyperinflation?
Sure. So over the long run, the prices of goods and services tend to go up. Central banks try to keep that as a regular number. In the US, that number is like 2% a year. In other countries, it might be higher at like 3 to 4%. Hyperinflation is on the order of like hundreds of percent, thousands of percent, where the prices are doubling like every day. The examples that people will turn to are like Weimar Germany or like Zimbabwe.
Yep.
These are very rare occurrences and usually are like catastrophic government
Yeah.
failures. Nothing even close to this happened in the US. Like we had the worst inflation in American, like modern American history over the last couple of years. And like imagine that level of inflation every month. That would still be like on the low end of what hyperinflation actually means.
So, Balaji, this big Bitcoin guy, why did he think, what was his reasoning for why he thought the United States was going to enter hyperinflation?
So Balaji is like a self-described tech Zionist. He really strives for these kind of like Singapore-like, Israel-like states that are very right-wing autocracies that do economic development very intensely. And he believes that institutions in democratic countries like the Federal Reserve are like doomed to failure. And he thinks that like, we have to go to decentralized platforms like Bitcoin because these centralized agencies can't handle it. If you remember the exact timing here, this was like only a little bit after the Silicon Valley Bank bailout. So Balaji's logic, which does not make any coherent sense, was like, here was this bailout. It's not going to be enough. They're going to have to bail out all of the banks. You know, Bank of America and JP Morgan, they're all going to have to be bailed out. Bailing them out is going to cause a recession and hyperinflation. Those two things normally don't line up. Like normally when there's a recession, the prices of things fall because the economy is cratering. But that was like his core logic. And I think to an extent, something he still believes. And the reason I'm saying that is because his Twitter banner is still the image that he put up like only a few days after the Silicon Valley Bank failure, where Jerome Powell said that there could be a mild recession. And he likened that to when Ben Bernanke said that there could be a mild recession in 2007. Obviously now it's almost 2025 and the economy is on collapse.
Why were the terms of the bet that James Medlock made for $1 Bitcoin versus $1 million? Why was that so favorable to him?
Just at a basic level, a Bitcoin was not worth $1 million at the time. It still isn't. So like if you imagine this bet, James could have bought one Bitcoin for, at the time, I think like $30,000. Don't quote me on that. But let's say you bought that Bitcoin for $30,000. Either you'd have the hyperinflation and the Bitcoin is now worth $1 million, or you don't and you win the $1 million. So you can like perfectly hedge this at no cost. There was no way that Balaji was ever going to win this. And I think my personal theory is that he didn't realize how stupid it was until he fired off the tweet in like a split second of thinking in like, I'm going to show this guy. And then immediately after was like, oh yeah, this is dumb.
Yeah, I mean, to me, what it's like is it's like if you're in like a doomsday cult and you say, I bet you $1 million the world is going to end tomorrow. Because just to explain, to put it in other words, and I think you were getting at this, is like, if there was hyperinflation, one Bitcoin would be worth $1 million. But if we're in that scenario, then like, who cares? Like,
right. That's the essence of the joke, right? That Medlock was making. Like, if we're gonna have hyperinflation, a Bitcoin's gonna be worth $1 million. Like, who cares about the money that I bet you in US dollars? But obviously James didn't believe that there actually was going to be
No,
hyperinflation.
no.
I think it's like it's good because of how serendipitous it was. Like
Yeah,
James was not like fiending for like a bet. He
no.
wasn't like angrily no. This was like an offhanded joke that
Mhm.
Balaji took too seriously and like tweeted without thinking.
And as a
um,
member of Econ Twitter, how does it like? Is this something that you guys take pride in? That like, wow, one of our own made $1 million off of the stupidity of a tech guy.
I take a lot of pride in it. I think this was like the peak of a certain era of econ Twitter,
Hmm.
because there was a lot of people like James in like 2020, 2021 because economic policy was like such a core part of the recovery. People talking about like what needed to be done, blah blah blah, stopping like another Great Recession, and then that was kind of like petering out as Twitter was turning more right wing and also just becoming like a more annoying place to be. Um, and having this one moment where you like have one of your own luck into it was crazy. It was so many jokes for so long, and people like try to recreate the magic now. James himself, anytime something ridiculous is said now, he'll reply with like, "Want to bet on
I love it.
it?"
Yeah, he's
um,
yeah.
I remember him. He's done several other bets with people
Mhm.
who are less true
Mhm.
to their word than Balaji,
Yes.
at least.
Yes. We have to give him that. I want to thank Joey again for coming on. If there are any other econ-related tweets, he will be back. So yeah, as Joey explained, this was a ludicrously stupid bet for Balaji to make. And so it would be understandable if he would try to back out of it. But he didn't. Although the original terms of the bet were over 90 days, earlier than that, him and Medlock actually settled, and Medlock was paid $500,000, and $500,000 was given to the charity Give Directly. And I have to say, with no hint of irony, shouts to James Medlock for doing that. The man legitimately turned down $500,000 to give to charity. In part, it was to try to make a point about taxes. He's what's called a tax positivist, but I don't know enough about economics to explain that, and Joey already left, so let's keep going. I actually reached out to James via DM. I knew he wouldn't get on camera with me because he remains anonymous, but I asked him some quick questions about this whole experience, and this is what he had to say. I asked him what inspired him to put out the original tweet, and he said, "I felt like it was a banger, but I didn't give it much thought, honestly." I asked, what was your reaction when someone took you up on what was pretty clearly a joke? And he said pretty much pure disbelief, followed by suspicion there was some way I was being had. And then I asked him when it started to feel real that a shitpost was going to get him life-changing money. And he said, once lawyers were involved and we had an intermediary set up, it felt real. But the intermediary fell through and I thought it was slipping away. From then, it didn't really feel real until the money hit my bank account. And I asked him if there was an okay, let me treat myself thing he bought. And he said, this is a boring answer, but the first thing I did was pay off some debt. I didn't really get anything special except for some tasty pastries and a stand for my laptop. And I asked him, how do you feel about your online identity being that guy who won the hyperinflation bet? Does it get old? And he responded, nah, it never gets old. For the rest of my life, I'll be offering outlandish wagers in hopes that lightning strikes twice. I want to thank him a lot for answering those questions. By the way, he wasn't kidding. He tries to make bets with people all the time. Like when former Twitter CEO Jack said that RFK Jr. could beat Trump and Biden, Medlock says, I will bet you $1 million that he will not. When Elon Musk said that if Kamala won, she would ban X and put Elon in jail, Medlock said, interested in a wager? And when Jason Calacanis tried to say that UPS will have robotic delivery by 2029, James Medlock tried to make a $1 million bet that they will not. It's really the gift that keeps on giving. And for Balaji's part, he pivoted to basically saying that the point of the bet was not to win it, but to raise awareness for the problems with yada yada yada, who cares? Look, I'm not trying to get in an argument with anyone about cryptocurrency. In fact, I would rather argue about anything else. Like, I'd rather argue about The Last Jedi online than cryptocurrency. But let me just say, if someone says that they made $1 million bet that they lost just to make a point, the last thing I'm going to do is trust what they had to say about money. And if you think I'm stupid and you disagree and you do think the United States is going to enter hyperinflation, that's fine. We can agree to disagree. But I do have one question. Are you interested in making a wager? Follow me for a new tweet every day. Consider subscribing with the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, and you also can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On August 15, 2011, Blake Griffin tweeted, accidentally hit a squirrel yesterday in my car. Feel so guilty I could barely sleep. Casey Anthony's a monster. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Sports Tweet Saturday, and I have to do a classic from the era of sports tweets before PR managers started tweeting for athletes. Because I have no doubt that this came from Blake Griffin himself. Blake Griffin is a recently retired NBA player who tweeted this right after his rookie season with the Los Angeles Clippers. And it occurs to me that since this tweet was tweeted over 13 years ago, there might be some people who are too young to get it. To keep it brief and to avoid the very morbid details, Casey Anthony is a woman who in 2008 was charged with murder murdering her 2-year-old daughter, Kaylee. Basically, Kaylee was missing for about a month before Casey reported it to anyone. She actually only told her mom about it, and her mom was the one who reported her missing. And then a little while after that, Kaylee's body was found near Casey Anthony's parents' house. There's lots of evidence that Casey was involved, and it was a huge media firestorm. The picture that was painted was that Casey killed her daughter because she didn't like the responsibility of having a child and just wanted to party, etc., etc. I'm not saying that that's fair or not, but that was definitely the narrative. And in July of 2011, just a month before this tweet, Casey was found not guilty of murder or manslaughter. Obviously, this upset a lot of people. And so the connection that Blake Griffin is making is that he's saying that if hitting a squirrel with his car can make him unable to sleep, how could Casey Anthony allegedly kill her daughter and then keep on living life for a month before anyone was told? And if you're like, wow, that's an insane connection to make, you're correct. That's why it's a funny and important tweet. Lots of people mock this connection. It's a silly thing to make a connection about. Like, I get what he's talking about. I understand the point he's making. It's like taking a life as insignificant, quote unquote, as a squirrel is really devastating. So therefore, to take the life of someone who is close to you, who's your daughter, that should be earth-shattering. And if it isn't to someone, that means that they're like a monster or a sociopath. I get that that's what he's saying, but it is just a crazy thing to come out and tweet. And I always want to defend people, especially famous people, tweeting what's on their mind. But it is always a little awkward to start a tweet off with, accidentally hit a squirrel yesterday in my car. And honestly, I think it is a little tongue-in-cheek. Blake Griffin is known for being one of the funnier players in the NBA. He's done stand-up multiple times and is like actually funny. Like, he's extremely funny for an athlete, but if you saw him at a club, you'd be like, oh, this guy's pretty funny. And he also had a great appearance on Broad City. And so I think he is being a little cheeky having this much of a non sequitur. And also the thing is, people can relate. Multiple people quote tweeted this or referenced this, basically saying they know exactly how he feels. Audrey says, this just happened to me, literal nightmare. I'm crying, and the first thing I thought of was this tweet, RIP squirrel, I hate myself. Zarik says, today I hit a squirrel with my car for the first time. I pulled over and cried. Casey Anthony really is a monster. And Snoopy Boutique references it by saying, not to be like Blake Griffin Casey Anthony tweet, but I have to leave my cat alone for my 2 to 10 today, and I'm sad about it. I don't know how that one lady could do all that. And so yeah, Blake Griffin has a point. It's a weird point to just put out there with a non sequitur, but it's a point. And I think it shows that Blake Griffin is an extremely sensitive, empathetic man. Unless you're an equipment manager. Follow for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing where you get the weekly museum of not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also you can vote when I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On December 2nd, 2014, Sean Leahy tweeted, the Bond's name. James' name. Please to... What? Bond's name's the James. Are you alright? Bames non's having a stroke. Call the Bondulance. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. It's Subscriber Sunday, where my subscribers suggest and then vote on which tweet I cover, and they suggested a classic of joke Twitter. A classic that imagines what it would be like if 007 underwent a stroke when introducing himself to a lady. This tweet plays on the fact that the way that James Bond often introduces himself is by saying the name is Bond. James Bond. In fact, he does this in the very first James Bond movie, Dr. No. And it is an incredibly riffed-on premise. I'm sure you or your friends have in your lifetime made a joke that involves you changing one of the words to the name's Bond, James Bond. And so this tweet starts off pretty simply with the Bond's name, James' name. That in itself is silly and stupid. It's a type of joke you could imagine making with your friends when watching a James Bond movie on cable. But this tweet takes this to its logical conclusion. What would have to be going on in order for Bond to introduce himself as James' name? He'd have to be having a stroke, or a stronk, which is what James Bond calls it in this tweet. Because of course he's having a stroke and can't speak correctly. Now part of why this is so funny is imagining a character as smooth as James Bond trying to say it. Like just imagine Sean Connery saying all of this. As I say all this, I definitely could imagine Roger Moore in A View to a Kill at age like 55 having a stroke on set. The band was creaky. But it's just extremely funny to imagine Daniel Craig's James Bond trying to flirt with Vesper Lynd and saying that his Bond is James' name. It's an extremely well-deployed version of what I like to call a Dane Bramage joke. I'm sure that someone has another name for it, but that's what I call it. Dane Bramage, of course, being what you say if you have brain damage, but since your brain's damaged, you spoonerismize it and say Dane Bramage. And the reason why it's so effective is because some of the words that come out of it are very, very funny. Specifically the end. Having a stronk and call a bondulance. Those are this tweet's lasting legacy, in my opinion. Like, Allie here says that whenever she misspeaks at work, she says, Bames non's having a stronk. Ethan Leahy responded to a report that Google had an AI-mazing tech venture by saying, if someone said AI-mazing tech venture to me, I would immediately call a bondulance. And when Ted Lieu tried to do some type of Gen Z slang tweet about Kamala Harris, the Hot Rock says, call the bondulance, Ted's having a stronk. Two great real-life examples of this being employed is Alexa saying, story time. After having heart surgery, I had symptoms of a stroke and was being rushed to the emergency room. Spoiler alert, I was fine. I remembered this meme in the car and started laughing and quoted it to my friend who was driving. She hadn't seen the meme and genuinely thought I was having a stroke because of this. And Pursuit of Balance, who says, fun fact, 2 years ago my friend was in hysterics trying to read this tweet out. A week later she had a stroke. We weren't allowed to visit. About a fortnight later, first message she sent to the group chat was, call a bondulance. I think I've said it before, but there really is no higher honor in tweeting than having your phrase just be a thing people say in their everyday life. Another great honor is to have your tweet turned into a cartoon, like Twoodle did. Look, I think there's an entire generation of Twitter users who can't see James Bond introduce himself without thinking about him having a strunk and the Bondulants needing to be called. And that is a testament to Sean's work, and it's also a testament, I think, to the cultural staying power of James Bond. Like, it's pretty nuts that a British secret agent series that started in the 60s is still so ubiquitous that basically everyone gets this joke without it needing to be explained. Like, I've seen all the James Bond movies because I have a lot of time and I like watching movies. But even if you've seen none of them, you get this joke. And know that if I ever introduce the show as the Museum of Mitter, you should call the Jaculins. Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing so you can do things like vote on which tweet I cover on Subscriber Sundays, and also you get the weekly Museum of Not Zero where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter. On July 24, 2013, Shameik Moore tweeted via AskFM, "Do you like white girls? Do I? Megan Fox, Vanessa Hudgens, Allison from Twilight. God, there's ... This is the Museum of Twitter, the show we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. So anyone who even a little bit follows celebrity news on the internet and celebrity Twitter, you know I'm covering this tweet today. But let me just give some quick background. Shameik Moore is an actor who is most notable for voicing Miles Morales in the 2 Spider-Verse animated films. But before then, he had been on some sitcoms and some movies like Joyful Noise and Dope, and at the time he tweeted this, he was 18 years old. An important thing to note is that this tweet was actually via AskFM, which was a site where people could ask you questions anonymously and you'd answer them on Twitter, and then the link would have the full answer. Actually, the day before I'm posting this, AskFM shut down for good. Like literally on December 1st of 2024. But its real heyday was on Twitter at this time. And before you ask, the link in this tweet is dead, so you can't actually know what he says after God there's. But let's talk about the elephant in the room, as in why I am covering this now. So a thing that anyone with eyes and ears has observed is that on the press tours for the Spider-Verse movies, Shameik Moore is infatuated with his co-star Hailee Steinfeld. As the kids say, he is often shooting his shot, but his shot shooting looks like this. This guy Phil For Real on Twitter made a compilation of him flirting with her in interviews, and it's honestly a little hard to watch, so let's see how much I can get through.
It's easier to be Miles flirting with Gwen when I'm looking at Hailee.
When you're looking at her, right.
I was very happy to work with Hailee. I'm gonna watch Paper Moon, just so I can,
So you know?
Just so I can, like, be closer to Hailee.
No, that's too much. I can't. Shameik, what are you doing? And the reason this is all coming up now, because the last Spider-Verse came out over a year ago, is because Hailee Steinfeld just announced that she is engaged to her boyfriend, Josh Allen, the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills. And shortly after this announcement, Shameik tweeted, "There's still more people to meet, more opportunities to come, and more chances to try. Live, learn, apply." Now, this is not specifically about Hailee Steinfeld getting engaged to Josh Allen, but come on. Everyone was like, man, you're really torn up about fumbling her. And fumbling is the wrong word, because the thing I really want to emphasize, and I think when people are talking about this, they're being unfair to Hailee. Because what is clear if you watch any of the interviews where he's flirting with her, is that she's just not interested. Like, yes, we can all relate to a guy wanting to date Hailee Steinfeld. She's beautiful and talented and in a lot of nerdy stuff. She is really an ideal woman to a lot of guys. But if she's not interested in you, you just gotta accept that, especially when you've known her and been her coworker for like 5 years. Like, I'm sorry, I know that we joke about shooting your shot and this, that, or the other, but if you're shooting your shot with the same coworker for 4 years, and she makes it clear that she's not interested in you, and then she gets engaged to someone else, you're not really allowed to be publicly crestfallen about it. At least if you are, people will roast you. And of course, when people made fun of him for this, Shameik followed up by saying, "Y'all been twisting my words and fuck with my name for years now." It's like, okay man, we rolled the tape. And obviously, this all brought back to the fore the tweet that I talked about at the beginning about him loving white girls. This is both because Hailee Steinfeld is a white woman that he's thirsting over. I mean, technically she's 1/8 Filipino and 1/8 African American, but I'm not going to litigate the ethnicity of someone on this app. And also because if you tweet one stupid thing, it will get brought up every other time you tweet another stupid thing. There's definitely a type of person on Twitter, and this includes me, who sees Shameik Moore tweeting something stupid and says, "Hey, I can bring up the do I tweet again." Because I think the do I tweet and his thirsting and shot shooting over Hailee Steinfeld show him to be a pretty big dork. Also, there was that time that he said that Rosa Parks should have just taken a cab. I'm not going to go into that, but that was definitely a thing he said. So yeah, the knives are out for the man, and I think in some ways, fairly. At the very least, the making fun of knives should be out for him. Now let's talk about this tweet independent of the Hailee Steinfeld context. It's just insane. The do I, the what are you doing? As Amber points out, Shameik Moore talking about white girls like Kel talk about orange soda. Like, why did he have to type that out? It's like a cartoon animal seeing a big piece of ham. I, Jay Christie, am not going to touch the racial politics of this with the 20-foot pole, but I feel like if he wasn't so weird about what he was saying, people wouldn't make such a big deal of it. Like, yeah, he's an 18-year-old in 2013 who has a crush on Megan Fox. Who didn't? But yeah, let's go through these people. Megan Fox, Vanessa Hudgens, and Allison from Twilight. Those of us who have watched the Twilight film series could tell you that there is no character named Allison, but I assume he's talking about Alice, played by Ashley Greene. And Vanessa Hudgens is obviously Vanessa Hudgens, made famous from the High School Musical films, etc. And you know Megan Fox from the Transformers films and all that. These are all perfectly acceptable and normal celebrities to have a crush on. If he had just said, yes, there are some white girls I like, Megan Fox, Ashley Greene, Vanessa Hudgens, that would be fine. With the exception of the fact that Vanessa Hudgens is not white, but whatever. But he didn't do that. He said, What the fuck are you doing? The only time it's acceptable to type out that many M's in a row is if you are saying that you're thinking, or if someone texts you a photo of a great plate of food. The mere question of whether or not you like white girls has you drooling? Come on, man, get it together. Yes, I know that this is something he tweeted when he was 18 years old, and I don't want to hold him to it directly. But like I said, we just watched the video of him with Haley Steinfeld. Clearly, he still has this behavior in his system. Shameik is obviously not happy with the way that the world perceives him. And that's fine. I understand where he's coming from. But I think his problem is that if you have a history of walking like a duck and quacking like a duck, eventually it becomes incumbent upon you to demonstrate that you're not a duck. And subtweeting about a woman who you've shot your shot with publicly a bunch of times, who's never given you the time of day, subtweeting about her getting engaged, is supreme duck behavior. Follow me for a new tweet every day and consider subscribing with the Weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also you can vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays. On January 2nd, 2021, Kaylee tweeted, Gracie, didn't you say you were logging off? Please, I know you're in a bad headspace right now. Gracie responded, can you KYS please? I can't handle this right now. Alex replied, shawty, that's over the line, /serious, adding, sorry I called you shawty. I say it when I'm nervous. This is the Museum of Twitter, the show where we talk about the most important tweets in the history of Twitter.com. Admittedly, one of my blind spots on Twitter is Stan Twitter. It's just never been something I've been a part of, and it's not something that comes across my timeline that often. And so, like a month or two into doing this series, I got a message from someone saying, hey, you should look at this exchange from MCR Stan Twitter, that being My Chemical Romance Stan Twitter. And it had a link, and I clicked the link thinking, okay, I'll humor this person, I'm sure it's not going to be that funny, what do they know, yada yada. And I apologize. Big mea culpa from me. Because sorry for calling you shoddy, I say it when I'm nervous, is one of the funniest things that I've ever read in my entire life. To paraphrase the great Shaquille O'Neal, MCR Stan Twitter, I was not familiar with your game. This whole conversation just has every hallmark of an extremely online conversation. First starting off with using phrases like, you're in the wrong headspace, you need to log off, and then a wild accusation out of nowhere, and then a third person coming in and talking in such a way that no one has ever talked in real life. Okay, that's not true. I'm sure at least one person in the real world has said, shoddy, that's over the line. But I don't think that person is also someone with a Gerard Way profile photo. But as you can tell from my tone, this isn't my world. I'm being a little judgmental of it, and I don't think that that's the best way for me to present this tweet to you. And I was putting off covering this conversation because I wanted to have an expert of some kind on Stan Twitter because I didn't want to just be me being judgy. And through happenstance, I met a friend of a friend who's been part of Stan Twitters for bands, TV shows, etc. for over a decade. Rachel Tolleson is a freelance writer you can read places like the Mary Sue, and she hopped on to talk about MCR Stans and other Stan Twitter with me. Rachel, I will be the first to admit that I don't know almost anything about Stan Twitter, specifically nothing about MCR Stan Twitter. And so can you give me a little bit of context to understand what community this exchange is going on in?
It is a wild community. Any Stan Twitter that I've been in, like I've been in Fall Out Boy Stan Twitter, I've been in like MCU, all of that stuff. It's very it's a lot. It's very passionate, and people, especially I feel like MCR Stan Twitter, people really tend to, there's a lot of like joking going on. Like it feels to me, it didn't feel like it was like always like a bad Twitter group necessarily. All the interactions that I always saw with it, people seemed pretty chill, but also people have like no chill when it comes to interacting with band members. Like that's how it's always going to go with Stan Twitter. So a lot of it is people when, like the celebrity or whomever posts something, people are gonna like mess with them a little bit, or they're gonna say like weird things to them, either hoping that they're going to respond or not thinking that they're going to respond. And then we get those kinds of exchanges where you're like, okay.
And is there like, how would you say that the like social adeptness of people who are on Stan Twitter, like would you say that they're socially aware, that they're good at interacting with each other? Because the outside of the bands interacting with each other, how is their social ability?
I mean, honestly, there's a good community there. You get the right groups of people together. So it's like, it's kind of like any social media thing, especially with like the younger group, because it seems like a lot of these Stan Twitters, like, I'm in my 30s, like I've been a fan of My Chemical Romance since like 2004. Like I was a fan before all of these kinds of communities came about. So it feels like to me, a lot of these communities are younger
Yeah.
people, like Gen Z, like maybe like younger millennials, just like those kinds of people. And there's a good community they build in. Like people have really good friend groups, really tight knit friend groups,
Hmm.
but there's also, a lot of like infighting and things like that. So it's not always totally copacetic in those.
See, I really appreciate that you took a question that I kind of was trying to bait you into saying something mean about stan communities, and you said something positive, and that's why I'm glad I brought you on, because I'm judgmental, honestly. Outside of MCR Twitter, is there another, like, stan Twitter that you've observed that you think doesn't get as much attention? Because obviously, like, I think when I think of stan Twitter, I think of, like, K-pop stans, I think of,
Yeah.
like, MCU stans. What is a stan Twitter that you're like, these people are kind of crazy in a good or bad way?
I'm in the Our Flag Means Death fandom, and it
Mm-hmm.
is 100% one of those fandoms where everybody is a little crazy, but in
Mm-hmm.
very, very good ways. Like this is one of the few fandoms I've been in since the inception, so I've kind of seen
Mm-hmm.
it grow from like a little kind of there was like
Yeah.
not that many people, and now there's whole communities, there's huge communities of people for this stan Twitter, and it can have good times and it can have bad times. It really just kind of depends on
Uh-huh.
who you talk to on there. So that's one I feel like you're not going to know a lot about it unless you're aware of the show itself, but it
Got
is
it.
a very, very vocal minority.
I really do want to thank Rachel for coming on to talk about the positive aspects of Stan Twitter. I'm glad that I was able to get her perspective because I didn't want to put this episode out if it was just me being like an old man talking about Stans. Back to the exchange itself, some of you might be familiar with it because it was mentioned by Curtis Connor in a YouTube video he uploaded a few years ago. In it, he did a skit where someone does say shawty when they're nervous, and it's very funny. I recommend it. It's about 6 minutes into this video. I would clip it, but I don't want to steal it from him. Watch it on his page. Give him ad dollars. A thing I do want to bring up, and I have no way of knowing whether or not this is true, but Will basically says that in this exchange, Kaylee and Gracie are trolling, and Alex is the only one being serious. That would make Gracie's wild, out of nowhere aggression towards Kaylee make sense. And it would also make Alex jumping in a lot more funny to me. That, like, Kaylee and Gracie were doing a bit, and Alex comes in and is like, shawty, that's over the line. But let's talk about why we're here. What the hell does it mean to say shawty when you're nervous? When I'm nervous, I stutter, I might repeat myself, I might not make eye contact. What I don't do is use slang that I definitely can't pull off. Because look, I don't know this for sure, and I can't confirm because Alex's Twitter account no longer exists. But Alex, whether they're a boy Alex, a girl Alex, or a non-binary Alex, is almost certainly someone who if you saw them use shawty in real life, you'd be like, hey, that's not a word that feels natural coming out of your mouth. And how often does this come up? How many times has Alex said shawty when they were nervous? And this is also a text conversation, so you don't say shawty when you're nervous, I guess you type shawty when you're nervous? You were so nervous when you saw Gracie's mean message that you couldn't help yourself from typing SHAWTY? Maybe I'm being too judgmental, because Cameron replied to a post with this screenshot saying, there will be times where I randomly say shawty, then quote this, I can't handle it, it's so funny. And as is always the case with funny conversations on Twitter, people have put the different tweets in the mouths of fictional characters like this, where Swordtoad GF says that this is Gale, Shadowheart, and Karlach in that order. Those are apparently characters from Baldur's Gate 3, a game I have not played, but, I have Google. I do hope Alex is doing well, and I do appreciate that they recognize how silly it is that they said shawty, that's over the line. They didn't need to follow up with an apology. Like, I just don't know how many times people have ever said, hey, sorry for calling you shawty. And doing research for this, and talking to Rachel, and talking to some of the people in my Discord that you can get into if you're a subscriber, I've grown a greater appreciation and understanding of Stan Twitter. Shawty, if I've gained anything from this series, I've gained that. Follow for a new tweet every day, and consider subscribing. We get the weekly Museum of Not Twitter, where I cover a thing that was big on the internet that did not start on Twitter, and also, like I said, you can get into a Discord where you can suggest and vote on what I cover on Subscriber Sundays.